2 years ago, the coroner wrote cardiac arrest on my wife Ruby's death certificate. He was wrong. My wife didn't die from a weak heart. She died because of a secret she hid behind the drywall of her home office. I had no idea that secret existed until an hour ago. I had no idea that the people I invited to Sunday dinner were the same people praying for my downfall. I am Isaiah Turner, 72 years old, and I spent 50 years building skyscrapers in Chicago, reinforcing steel and pouring concrete so that other people could sleep safely at night. But I failed to reinforce the foundation of my own family. Today, a contractor named Matteo called me with a tremor in his voice that I have never heard before. He told me not to come to the job site alone. He told me to bring my sons. And when I saw what was hidden behind that wall, I realized that the only thing thicker than blood is the greed that turns it cold. Before I tell you what we found and how I made them pay, hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to watch your back around the people who are supposed to have it. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from. The rain in Chicago has a way of getting into your bones when you are over 70. It was a cold, gray Tuesday, the kind of day that makes your joints ache with the memory of every heavy load you ever lifted. I was standing at the counter of a small flower shop on the south side, water dripping from the brim of my hat onto the linoleum floor. In my hand, I held a bouquet of fresh peonies. They were Ruby's favorite. Pink, tight buds that she used to say looked like clenched fists before they opened up into something soft. Today was the second anniversary of her passing. The clerk, a young girl with bright purple braids, smiled at me kindly as she ran my debit card. Then came the sound. That sharp, three-tone beep that sounds like a judgment. Declined. I frowned, tapping the chip against the machine again. It was a mistake. It had to be. I am a retired engineer. I have a pension. I have savings. Or at least I thought I did. Try it again, please, I said, my voice steady though my stomach began to turn. She tried. Declined. I can't explain the specific type of shame that washes over a man when he cannot pay $40 for flowers for his dead wife. It is not just embarrassment. It is a loss of manhood. I felt the people in line behind me shifting their weight, checking their watches. I mumbled an apology, left the flowers on the counter, and walked out into the downpour. I sat in my truck, the engine cold, and dialed my eldest son, Dante. 2 years ago, when grief had me so blind I couldn't see straight, I signed over the power of attorney to him. He said it was to help me manage the bills. He said I needed to rest. I trusted him. He was my firstborn. Dante answered on the fourth ring. I could hear the background noise of a high-end restaurant, clinking glasses and laughter. Dad. I'm in a meeting, Dante said. No hello, no asking how I was on this specific day. My card was declined, Dante. I am at the florist. I just wanted to buy peonies for your mother. Why is the account empty? I heard him sigh, a long, exaggerated sound of impatience. Dad, we talked about this. The liquidity is tied up in the bond market right now. You are overspending. You don't need expensive flowers. Mom is gone. She doesn't know the difference between peonies and dandelions. The air in the truck seemed to vanish. He spoke about her as if she were a line item on a spreadsheet that he had deleted. Unlock the account, Dante. I need gas to get home. I can't just move money around instantly, Dad. Go home. I'll order you an Uber if you're stuck. We can discuss your budget on Sunday. I have to go. The line went dead. I stared at the phone. My budget. The money I earned sweating in the summer sun while he was in private school. He was treating me like a child with an allowance. I looked at the dashboard. I had enough gas to get to the cemetery, but maybe not enough to get back. I didn't care. I drove to the cemetery in silence. The wipers slapped against the glass, keeping time with my heartbeat. When I reached Ruby's grave, the grass was slick with mud. I didn't have the flowers, so I just stood there with my empty hands hanging by my sides. I'm sorry, Ruby, I whispered. I let them take everything. You warned me. You always said Dante had too much hunger and not enough grit. I stood there for 20 minutes, letting the rain soak through my coat, feeling like a ghost in my own life. I was ready to give up. I was ready to go home, lie down, and let Dante and his wife Tiffany put me in that nursing home they kept leaving brochures for on my kitchen counter. Then my phone rang. It wasn't Dante. It was Matteo. Matteo was a contractor I had hired a week ago to renovate Ruby's old home office at the back of our property. It was a small building separate from the main house. I wanted to turn it into a reading room, a place to remember her without the clutter of her old business files. Mateo was a good man, a hard worker from Mexico who reminded me of myself 40 years ago. He was usually calm, steady as a rock, but when I answered, his voice was high and tight. "Mr. Ike. Are you near the house? I'm at the cemetery, Mateo. What is it? Did a pipe burst?" "No, sir. Listen to me." We were taking down the drywall behind the heavy oak bookcases, the ones built into the structure. "I know the ones," I said. "What about them?" Mateo paused. I could hear his breathing rapid and shallow. "Mr. Ike, you need to come here, right now. But listen to me carefully. Do not come alone." My eyebrows pulled together. The rain ran down my nose. "What are you talking about, Mateo? Bring your sons," he said. "Bring Dante and Jamal. They need to see this. If you come alone, they will say you made it up. They will say I planted it. You need witnesses, Mr. Ike. Planted what, Mateo? You are scaring me. I cannot say it over the phone, sir. I don't know who is listening. But what I found, it explains the fire." I froze. The fire. 2 years ago, on the night Ruby died, there had been a small electrical fire in that office. The fire department said it was faulty wiring. They said the smoke triggered Ruby's heart attack. It was ruled an accident, a tragedy. "Mateo," I said, my voice dropping to a growl, "what did you find? Just get them here, Mr. Ike. Tell them whatever you have to tell them. But get them here." The line clicked off. I sat there, the phone gripping tight in my hand. Mateo was not a man given to drama. If he was scared something was wrong, something was dangerous, and he wanted my sons there. I knew if I called Dante and told him there was a problem at the construction site, he wouldn't come. He would tell me to call a repairman. He would tell me he was too busy. He didn't care about the house. He only cared about the value of the land underneath it. To get a shark to surface, you have to chum the water with blood, or in Dante's case, with gold. I dialed Dante back. My hand was shaking not from cold, but from a sudden cold rage that was waking up inside me. "What is it now?" Dad, Dante answered, clearly annoyed. "I told you I'm busy." "Dante, listen to me," I said, making my voice sound breathless, excited. "I am at the house." Mateo found something behind the wall. "So let the contractor deal with it." "No, Dante, you don't understand." Behind the bookcase, there was a false wall. We found a safe. The silence on the other end was instant. The background noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away as he pressed the phone closer to his ear. A safe. What kind of safe? Old. Heavy. It was hidden, Dante. We cracked it open. I paused. I let the silence hang there for 3 seconds. The hook was in the water. "There is cash, Dante, stacks of it. And gold bars. It looks like your mother didn't trust the banks as much as we thought. There must be $500,000 here. I don't know what to do." I could practically hear his greed salivating through the speaker. "Don't touch anything," Dad, Dante shouted. "Do not call the police. Do not tell the contractor to take anything. Is Jamal there?" "No," I said. "Call Jamal. I'm coming over. I'm leaving right now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Stay right there." I hung up. Then I called Jamal, my younger son, who never did anything without Dante's permission. I told him the same lie. I put the truck in gear. The engine roared to life, sounding angry. I wasn't just an old man with a declined debit card anymore. I was a man on a mission. I didn't know what Mateo had found. I didn't know what was in that wall. But I knew one thing. My sons were coming. They were coming for gold, but they were going to find something else entirely. I drove out of the cemetery gates, leaving Ruby behind in the cold ground. But as I turned onto the main road, I felt her with me. I felt her sharp wit and her intolerance for nonsense. "I am coming, Ruby," I said to the empty cab, "and I am bringing the wolves with me." By the time I pulled into the driveway of our family estate, the rain had stopped, leaving the world slick and shiny. Dante's black BMW was already there, parked haphazardly on the lawn, tearing up the grass. Jamal's truck was right behind him. They were standing by the front door of the office, pacing. Tiffany, Dante's wife, was there too. Of course she was. She was wearing a beige trench coat and heels that sank into the mud. She looked like she was ready to audit a bank vault. I stepped out of my truck. My knees hurt, but I stood tall. "Where is it?" Dante demanded, rushing toward me. "Where is the money?" "Inside," I said, pointing to the open door of the office where sawdust floated in the air like fog. Matteo was standing in the doorway. He looked pale. He was holding a crowbar in one hand, his knuckles white. He looked at me, then at my sons. He nodded once. The sound of car doors slamming shut echoed like gunshots in the quiet afternoon. I watched from the dusty window of the office as my family marched across the lawn. They moved with a speed and purpose I had not seen in years. It wasn't love that made them run. It wasn't concern for my safety. It was the smell of money. It was the promise of a safe full of gold that I had dangled in front of them like raw meat before a pack of starving wolves. Dante was in the lead, his face flushed, his tie loosened. Beside him was Jamal, sweating even in the cool air, looking around nervously as if he expected the police to jump out from the bushes. And then there was Tiffany. My daughter-in-law was wearing a white cashmere coat and stilettos that cost more than the monthly pension of the men who built this country. She stepped gingerly onto the wet grass, her face twisted in disgust as her heels sank into the mud, but she didn't stop. Greed is a powerful motivator. It makes you walk through dirt you would normally pay someone else to clean up. They burst into the small office building without knocking. They didn't look at me. They didn't ask why I was standing in the corner with my arms crossed. Their eyes went straight to the gaping hole in the wall where the heavy oak bookcase had been pulled away. "Where is it?" Tiffany demanded, her voice shrill. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just looked at the hole in the wall with hungry eyes. "Where is the safe, Ike? You said there was gold." I stayed silent. I let the silence stretch out heavy and suffocating. I nodded toward Matteo, who was standing by the exposed studs holding a flashlight. Matteo stepped aside, shining the beam of light into the dark cavity between the walls. "Show them, Matteo," I said softly. Dante pushed past me, practically shoving me into a stack of old blueprints. He leaned into the wall, his eyes wide, expecting to see the glint of metal, the stack of cash. Jamal crowded in behind him. But there was no gold. There was no steel safe. "What the hell is this?" Dante whispered. His voice trembled, but not with excitement. It was the tremble of a man who sees his own nightmare staring back at him. Inside the wall, strapped to the wooden frame with heavy-duty zip ties, was a cluster of copper pipes. But they weren't part of the plumbing. They had been cut and rerouted in a chaotic, amateurish loop. Yellow gas valves had been bypassed. And sitting in the center of this mess was a small black plastic box about the size of a pack of cigarettes with red and blue wires running directly into the building's main electrical junction box. "It's a timer," Matteo said. His voice was calm, clinical, the voice of a man who knows exactly what he is looking at. Tiffany pushed forward, peering over Dante's shoulder. "I don't understand," she snapped, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "What is this junk? Where is the money, Ike? Is this some kind of sick joke? Did you bring us here to look at old plumbing?" "It's not plumbing, Mrs. Turner," Matteo said, turning to look her dead in the eye. "Then what is it?" she spat back. "It is a bomb," Matteo said. The word hung in the air like toxic smoke. Tiffany froze. Jamal let out a small, strangled sound and took a step back, bumping into a sawhorse. "Technically, it is an incendiary device," Matteo continued, shining his light on the black box. "It is homemade, very crude. See these pipes? They are gas lines. Someone cut them to let the gas fill the wall cavity. And this box, it is a timer connected to a spark igniter. The plan was simple. Let the room fill with gas for a few hours, then trigger the spark. The explosion would have leveled this entire building. It would have looked like a tragic accident, a gas leak, old pipes." Dante was pale. His skin, usually a rich, healthy brown, had turned the color of ash. He was staring at the black box as if it were a venomous snake poised to strike. "But it didn't go off," Matteo said, tapping the box with the end of a screwdriver. "The soldering on the timer wire was bad. The battery connector corroded. The clock stopped. It failed to spark. When I asked," my voice sounded distant to my own ears, "when was this set?" Matteo looked at the digital display on the dead timer. It was frozen on a date. 2 years ago, he said. October 14th. I felt my knees buckle and I had to lean against the wall for support. October 14th. That was the day Ruby died. That was the day she stayed late in this office to go over the quarterly tax returns. That was the night the fire department said a small electrical short caused smoke which triggered her heart attack. But it wasn't a short. It was a failed detonation. My wife didn't just die. She was targeted. I looked at my sons. I looked at the children Ruby had nursed, the boys she had walked to school, the men she had bailed out of trouble time and time again. Dante was not looking at me. He was staring at his shoes, his chest heaving. Jamal was chewing on his fingernail, a nervous habit he had since he was 5 years old. "You are lying!" Tiffany screamed suddenly, breaking the silence. She pointed a shaking finger at Mateo. "You are a liar! You planted this! You and this senile old man cooked this up to scare us. You want to manipulate us into feeling sorry for him so he can move back into the main house. I know your game." "Tiffany, shut up," Dante hissed, grabbing her arm. "No, I won't shut up," she yelled, pulling away. "Look at this place. It's a dump. This is probably just old construction trash." "And you," she turned her fury on Mateo. "Who are you anyway? Just some cheap laborer Ike found on the street. I'll sue you. I'll sue you for slander. I'll have your license revoked. I'll have you deported." I stood up straight. The grief was still there, but it was being pushed down by a cold, hard rage. "Mateo is a licensed structural engineer," I said quietly. "And he found something else, Tiffany." I nodded to Mateo again. Mateo reached into the front pocket of his work vest. He didn't say a word. He just held out his hand, palm open. Resting on his calloused palm was a silver Zippo lighter. It was dirty, covered in drywall dust and cobwebs, but the metal still shone under the work lights. "We found this wedge between the stud and the floor plate right below the gas valve," Mateo said. "It must have slipped out of someone's pocket when they were crouching down to wire the timer." Tiffany stopped screaming. She stared at the lighter. Dante made a noise in his throat, a sound like a dying animal. He reached out a hand to snatch it, but Mateo closed his fist and pulled it back. "No," Mateo said. "Evidence." I stepped closer to Mateo and looked at the lighter. I didn't need to hold it to know what it was. I knew the weight of it. I knew the sound it made when it flicked open. I knew it because I was the one who bought it. 10 years ago, for Dante's 35th birthday, I had given him that lighter. I had it custom engraved. I looked at Dante. Tears were streaming down his face now, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of terror. "Dad," Dante choked out. "Dad, wait. I can explain. It's not what it looks like. I lost that lighter years ago. Someone must have found it. Someone stole it." Tiffany looked from Dante to the lighter, and for the first time I saw the calculation in her eyes falter. She recognized it too. She had used that lighter to light her slim cigarettes 1,000 times at family barbecues. "What does it say on the side, Mateo?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mateo rubbed his thumb over the engraving, clearing away the dust. "It says, 'To Dante, build your own legacy. Love, Dad.'" The room seemed to spin. The irony of those words cut through me like a knife. I had told him to build his own legacy. Instead, he had tried to burn down ours. Mateo put the lighter back in his pocket and buttoned it shut. "I think we should call the police now," Mateo said. "No." Jamal screamed. He dropped to his knees in the sawdust, grabbing the hem of my coat. "No, Dad, please, don't call the cops. It was just a mistake. It was just a stupid idea. We didn't mean to hurt Mom. We thought she was going out for dinner. We just wanted the insurance money." "Shut up, Jamal," Dante roared, kicking his brother in the ribs. "Shut your mouth." But it was too late. The truth was out. It hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. They hadn't come here to save me. They hadn't come here to mourn their mother. They had come here 2 years ago to turn her life's work into ash for a payout. And when it failed, when the bomb didn't go off but the stress killed her anyway, they walked away and left the evidence rotting in the walls. I looked down at Jamal, weeping at my feet. I looked at Dante, panting with rage and fear. I looked at Tiffany, whose face was a mask of calculation, already trying to figure out how to distance herself from this. I felt a strange calmness wash over me. The father in me wanted to weep. But the man in me, the engineer who knows that you cannot build a house on a rotten foundation, knew what had to be done. "Get up, Jamal," I said coldly. "Dad, please." Dante started stepping toward me with his hands out. "We were in debt. You don't know how bad it was. The sharks were coming for us. We didn't have a choice. We always have a choice, Dante," I said. "You chose money over your mother's life." I turned to Mateo. "Lock the door, Mateo." Tiffany's eyes went wide. "What? You can't keep us here. This is kidnapping." "I'm not keeping you here," I said, pulling out my phone. "I'm just making sure you're here when the sheriff arrives." I dialed 911, but as I pressed the call button, Dante lunged. He didn't lunge at me. He lunged at Mateo. He was desperate. He was younger, bigger, and fueled by the panic of a man who sees his life ending. He tackled Mateo into the wall, knocking the wind out of him. The lighter flew out of Mateo's pocket and skittered across the floor, sliding toward the open hole in the wall, toward the gas pipes. "Get the lighter," Dante screamed to Tiffany. And that was when the real chaos began. The struggle for the lighter lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Dante, fueled by a desperate, animalistic panic, scrambled over the pile of drywall and snatched the silver Zippo from the floor. He didn't just pocket it, he reared back and hurled it with all his might into the deep, dark gap between the foundation and the subfloor, a narrow abyss filled with sharp nails and 20 years of dust. We heard the metallic clink as it hit something deep down in the darkness, followed by silence. The evidence was gone, or at least it was gone enough for a lawyer to argue it never existed. Dante stood up, his chest heaving, his expensive suit covered in white dust. He pointed a shaking finger at Mateo. "You saw nothing," he spat, his voice cracking. "You are a contractor. You are a nobody. You planted that gas line. You brought that lighter here. You are trying to extort my family because you know we have money." I looked at my son. I looked at the man I had taught to ride a bike, the man I had taught to tie a tie. And all I saw was a stranger. A dangerous stranger. "Dante," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "you tried to burn it down. You tried to burn the office for the insurance money." "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," Jamal blurted out, tears streaming down his face. He was huddled in the corner looking like a frightened child. "We thought she was going to dinner with you, Dad. We checked her calendar. She wasn't supposed to be there." "Shut up, Jamal," Dante roared, spinning on his brother. "Shut your mouth or I will kill you myself." The confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My knees finally gave out and I sank onto a stack of lumber. The world was spinning. They didn't just want the money. They had been tracking her schedule. They had planned it. And when the fire department said the smoke inhalation triggered her cardiac arrest, they knew they had killed her. And for 2 years they had come to Sunday dinner, eaten my food, and looked me in the eye, knowing they were the architects of my widowhood. They didn't murder her with a gun or a knife. They murdered her with greed. Tiffany stepped forward then. She had been quiet during the scuffle, her eyes darting around the room, calculating. Now she had found her angle. She walked over to Dante, brushed the dust off his shoulder, and then turned to face me. Her face was composed, cold, and terrifyingly calm. "Ike," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern, "I think you need to sit down. You are confused." "I am not confused, Tiffany," I said, looking up at her. "Jamal just confessed." "Jamal is upset because you are shouting," she said smoothly. "Listen to yourself, Ike. You are ranting about bombs and murder plots. You are dragging us to a construction site in the middle of the day. You are hallucinating." I stared at her. "What are you doing?" "I am calling Dr. Henderson," she said, pulling out her phone. "You haven't been well since the stroke, Ike. We all know it. You forget things. You get agitated. And now you have hired this man, this stranger, to rig up some fake gas pipes to frame your own children." She laughed, a short, sharp sound that had no humor in it. "It is sad, really. It is a clear sign of dementia, paranoia, persecution complex." She was rewriting reality right in front of me. "You are going to tell the police that I did this?" I asked. "I am going to tell the judge," she said, stepping closer, her perfume overpowering the smell of sawdust. "I am going to petition for an emergency conservatorship, Ike, for your own safety. You clearly cannot manage your own affairs anymore. You are a danger to yourself and others. Look at you. You are threatening your family with jail. You are imagining crimes that never happened." She looked at Dante. "Right. Dante. Your father is having an episode, isn't he?" Dante looked at his wife, then at me. I saw the hesitation in his eyes, for a split second, the last flicker of conscience. But then he thought about the debts. He thought about the prison cell waiting for him if the truth came out. "Yes," Dante said, his voice hardening. "Yes. He's having an episode. He's been talking crazy for weeks. He threatened to burn the house down himself yesterday. The betrayal was complete. They were not just going to cover up their crime, they were going to lock me away in a facility, medicate me into silence, and take control of everything Ruby and I had built. They would sell the house, sell the land, and spend every dime while I rotted in a room with padded walls." Mateo stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Mrs. Turner, you cannot be serious. I am a witness. I saw the lighter." Tiffany didn't even look at him. You "You are a trespasser. I will have you arrested for breaking and entering and for elder abuse. I bet you manipulated him into this, didn't you? Hoping to get a cut of his estate, get out of here before I call ICE." Matteo didn't move, but I saw the fear in his eyes. He had a family. He couldn't afford a legal war with rich people. "It's okay, Matteo," I said softly. "Ike." Matteo looked at me. "It's okay. Let them talk." I stood up slowly. My joints popped. I walked over to the open wall cavity. The gas pipes were there, ugly and undeniable, and hanging from the electrical wire was that black plastic box. The device Matteo had called a timer. I reached out and took the box in my hand. "Don't touch that," Dante yelled. "That's dangerous." I ignored him. I turned the box over in my hands. It was heavy, heavier than a simple timer should be. I wiped the dust off the back with my thumb. "You know Dante?" I said, keeping my back to them. "Your mother was a smart woman, but she was also a suspicious woman." "What are you babbling about?" Tiffany snapped. "Put that down." "She knew you were stealing from the company accounts 5 years ago," I continued. "She never told me because she didn't want to break my heart. But she started taking precautions. She didn't trust the employees. She didn't trust the cleaners. And eventually she didn't trust you." I turned around to face them. I held up the black box. "Matteo thought this was a timer for the bomb," I said, "because it was wired into the electricity and it was sitting next to the gas lines. And you, Dante, you probably thought it was just a junction box when you were cutting those pipes. You were too busy trying to kill your mother to look closely at what you were working around." I pressed a small latch on the side of the box. The plastic cover popped open. Inside there was no clock mechanism. There was no spark igniter. Sitting snugly in this casing was a high-end digital voice recorder wired to the building's power supply so it would never run out of battery. The red light on the side was blinking steadily. "This is a Vox Pro surveillance recorder," I said. "Ruby had them installed in the walls of her office a month before she died. She told me she wanted to catch the person who was leaking bid information to our competitors. She set them to voice activation." I looked at the small digital screen. It was recording right now. Dante's face went white. Tiffany stopped tapping on her phone. "It has a terabyte of memory," I said, my voice steady and cold. "And since it is hardwired, it doesn't overwrite old files until the drive is full." I looked Dante dead in the eye. "It recorded you just now, Dante. It recorded Jamal confessing that you checked the calendar. It recorded you throwing the lighter away. It recorded Tiffany threatening to put me in a home to shut me up." The room went deadly silent. But more importantly, I whispered, leaning in, "It was here 2 years ago." I saw the realization hit Dante like a physical blow. "If this machine was working on October 14th, I said, then it didn't just record the fire. It recorded the sound of you breaking in. It recorded the sound of you cutting these pipes. And it recorded the last words your mother said when she walked into this room and found her own son setting a trap for her." "Give it to me," Dante whispered. He took a step forward. "Give it to me now, Dad." I took a step back, gripping the recorder. "No," I said. "Get him!" Tiffany screamed. "Get the box!" Dante and Jamal lunged at me. They were desperate men, and I was just an old man with a bad heart. But I wasn't alone. Matteo stepped in front of me, grabbing a heavy crowbar from his tool belt. "Back off!" Matteo shouted. "I swear to God I will break your legs if you touch him." The standoff lasted only a second, but in that second the balance of power shifted. They had the youth and they had the greed. But we had the truth. And for the first time in 2 years, the truth was loud enough to be heard. But then sirens wailed in the distance. Police. Tiffany had called them before I even picked up the box. She smiled a cruel, twisted smile. "Good luck explaining that to the cops, Ike," she said. "It's your word against 3 of us. And we are the ones who called them." I looked at the recorder in my hand. I looked at Matteo. And I knew that the hardest part of this battle hadn't even started yet. I had the gun, but they had the army. And in America, justice doesn't always go to the one who is right. It goes to the one who can endure the fight the longest. Officer Tiffany screamed, running toward the door as the cruiser pulled up. "Help, my father-in-law has a weapon. He's having a psychotic break." I looked at Matteo. "Hide this," I whispered, shoving the recorder into his tool bag. "What?" Matteo asked. "They will search me," I said. "They will take everything I have. Take it. Run. Don't let them find it." Matteo looked at me, then at the door where the police were entering with guns drawn. He nodded once, zipped his bag, and slipped out the back window just as the first officer shouted for me to get on the ground. I went down to my knees, the cold dust pressing into my skin. But as the handcuffs clicked around my wrists, I didn't feel defeated. I felt dangerous. Because for the first time, I knew exactly who I was fighting. And I knew that my wife was watching. The war had just begun. The sirens outside were getting louder. A rising wail that usually signals help is on the way. But in that small, dust-choked room, the sound felt like a countdown. I knew the police were minutes, maybe seconds away from kicking down the door. Tiffany had painted me as a madman with a weapon, and in America, old black men holding strange objects in construction sites rarely get the benefit of the doubt. I looked at the Vox Pro recorder in my hand. It was small, black, and unassuming, but it held the weight of 2 years of grief. It held the answer to the question that had kept me awake for 730 nights. Why did my strong, healthy wife die of a heart attack in a room she knew like the back of her hand? Dante was staring at the device, his chest heaving. He looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting from the recorder to the door to the window. Jamal was sobbing quietly, a pathetic sound that made my stomach turn. They thought it was over. They thought the police would come in, arrest me, and bury the truth in a psych ward. But I had a thumb on the play button, and I wasn't going to let them hide anymore. I didn't say a word. I just pressed down. The tiny speaker crackled to life. At first there was only the sound of static, a white noise that sounded like rain. Then came the sound of metal clinking against metal. It was the sound of a wrench hitting a pipe. The audio was crisp, terrifyingly clear. Ruby had bought the best equipment to catch a corporate spy, never knowing she would catch her own executioners. Then a voice cut through the static. It was younger, arrogant, dripping with a confidence that made my skin crawl. It was Dante. "Stop whining, Jamal." The recording played. "Just cut the valve. We have to bypass the main line or the pressure will drop too fast and the gas company will notice before it blows." I looked at Dante in the present. He flinched as if he had been slapped. Hearing his own voice from the grave of the past seemed to paralyze him. But what if she comes back? Jamal's voice on the tape was shaky, just like it was now. "What if Dad comes? Dad is at the lodge meeting." Dante's recorded voice sneered. "And Mom is at that charity gala. The building is empty. By the time the timer sparks at 3 a.m., this place will be full of gas. One spark and boom, the whole structure goes. It's an electrical fault, Jamal. Happens all the time in old buildings." "But $2 million, Dante," Jamal asked. "Is the policy really that high?" 2.5, Dante corrected him. 2.5 million. Enough to pay off the Russians and have enough left over to buy that condo in Miami. Just cut the pipe. In the dusty room, Tiffany gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. She stared at her husband, horror dawning in her eyes. She loved money, yes. She was greedy, yes. But she hadn't known about this. I could see it in her face. She thought she married a businessman, not a domestic terrorist. "You wagered my wife's life for a condo in Miami," I whispered, my voice breaking. Dante didn't answer. He couldn't take his eyes off the little black box. The tape continued. There was a grunting sound, the squeal of metal twisting. Then suddenly the sound of a door opening. The heavy oak door of the office. I knew that creak. I had meant to oil it for years. Then the voice that stopped my heart. "Dante Jamal." It was Ruby. My knees nearly gave out. Hearing her voice alive, confused but strong, was like seeing a ghost. Tears blurred my vision. I saw Jamal squeeze his eyes shut, unable to handle the sound of the mother he had betrayed. "What are you doing here?" Ruby's voice asked. The confusion was shifting quickly to suspicion. She was a sharp woman. She didn't miss a beat. "Why is the drywall open? Why do you have those cutters, Mom?" Dante said. His voice on the tape was higher now, panicked. "Mom, go back inside. We are just fixing a leak." "There is no leak," Ruby snapped. "I just paid the maintenance bill, and I smell gas." She paused. The silence on the tape was thick with tension. Then came the realization. "You cut the line," she said. Her voice dropped an octave. It was the voice she used when she caught them lying as teenagers, but this time it was laced with genuine fear. "You are rigging the gas." "Are you insane? You are going to blow up the office." "We need the money," Mom, Dante shouted. The pretense was gone. "Just walk away. Go back to the house and pretend you saw nothing." "I will do no such thing," Ruby said. "I am calling your father. And then I am calling the police. You have lost your minds." There was the sound of movement, heavy footsteps. "Give me the phone!" Mom, Dante yelled. "Don't touch me!" Ruby cried out. Then came the sounds of a struggle, a scuffle of shoes on the wooden floor, a gasp, and then a sickening, heavy thud. It wasn't a soft sound. It was the sound of a head hitting the corner of a solid oak desk. Mom Jamal screamed, then silence. Dead silence. I stood there in the present shaking. The recorder was still playing, but there were no words, just heavy breathing. "Is she dead?" Jamal whispered on the tape. "Check her pulse," Dante snapped. I held my breath. I waited for the sound of them calling 911. I waited for the sound of CPR. I waited for my sons to try and save the woman who gave them life. "She's breathing," Jamal said, "but it's shallow. She's bleeding, Dante. We have to call an ambulance." No, Dante's voice was cold, freezing cold. "If she wakes up, she talks. If she talks, we go to prison. The Russians will kill us in there." "So what do? "We leave," Dante said. "Leave. She's hurt." "We leave Jamal. Let the gas finish it. If the explosion doesn't get her, the smoke will. We were never here. Wipe the tools. Let's go." "No, wait. Move." The sound of running footsteps, the door slamming shut. And then for the last 10 seconds of the recording, just the sound of my wife, alone in the dark, gasping for air. I stopped the tape. The silence that followed was louder than the sirens outside. "You left her," I whispered. The rage was gone, replaced by a hollow, icy void. "You didn't just cause an accident. She didn't die of a heart attack. You knocked her down. You saw she was alive. And you walked out the door and left her to die so you could collect a check." I looked up at Dante. "You murdered your mother." Dante was shaking. His face was wet with sweat and tears, but his eyes were wild. He looked at Tiffany, who was backing away from him as if he were a monster. He looked at Jamal, who had collapsed into a ball on the floor. He had nowhere to go. The truth was out. The monster was unmasked. And then he snapped. With a roar that sounded more like a beast than a man, Dante lunged at me. He didn't care about the police outside. He didn't care about the consequences. He just wanted to destroy the thing that held his life in its hands. I tried to turn to shield the recorder, but I was 72 years old and he was 45 and fueled by adrenaline. He slammed into me, knocking the wind out of my lungs. We crashed into the wall. I felt his hands clawing at my jacket, his fingernails digging into my wrist. "Give it to me." He screamed, spittle flying into my face. "Give it to me, you old fool!" I held on as tight as I could, but he was too strong. He wrenched my fingers back, snapping the bone in my pinky finger. I cried out in pain and my grip loosened. Dante snatched the black box from my hand. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look at it. He raised it high above his head and brought it down with all his force onto the concrete floor of the exposed foundation. Crack! Plastic shattered. Pieces of black casing flew across the room like shrapnel. But he wasn't done. He stomped on it. He ground his heel into the delicate electronics, crushing the memory chips, smashing the circuit board into dust. He stomped until there was nothing left but a pile of plastic shards and twisted wire. The door behind us burst open. "Police, drop it. Get on the ground." 3 officers stormed in, guns drawn, flashlights cutting through the dust. Dante stopped stomping. He stood there panting, staring at the pile of debris at his feet. He slowly raised his hands, a twisted, maniacal smile spreading across his face. He looked at me. His eyes were dead, devoid of soul, but filled with a terrifying triumph. "It's gone, Dad," he hissed, just loud enough for me to hear over the shouting of the police. He pointed at the pile of trash with his chin. "Where is your proof now?" He laughed, a dry, broken sound. "You are just a crazy old man with a pile of junk. Nobody heard that but us. And who are they going to believe, the successful businessman or the senile old man who hallucinates conspiracy theories?" Officer Dante shouted, turning his charm on like a light switch as the police grabbed him. "Thank God you are here, my father. He's having an episode. He attacked us. He's confusing reality." I lay on the floor, clutching my broken finger, watching them handcuff my sons, not for murder, but for safety. I looked at the destroyed recorder. My heart sank. He was right. The audio was gone. The evidence was dust. But as the officer pulled me to my feet and read me my rights, I looked over at the window where Matteo had escaped moments before. Dante thought he had destroyed the truth. He thought he had won. He didn't know that Matteo was a contractor who never went to a job site without his own backup. And he didn't know that the war wasn't over. It had just moved to a new battlefield, I let them lead me out in handcuffs, my head held high. Because I knew something Dante didn't. I knew that you can smash a machine, but you cannot smash the justice that is coming for you. You think you won, son, I thought as they shoved me into the back of the cruiser, but you just dug your grave a little deeper. The handcuffs clicked around my wrists with a sound that felt final. It was a cold mechanical sound that separated my past as a respected man from my present as a prisoner in my own life. I did not resist. I knew the rules of this game better than my son did. In a room full of shouting and broken plastic, the black man who raises his voice is the threat regardless of the truth. I went to my knees, not because I was weak, but because I wanted to live long enough to see them fall. Officer, please be gentle with him, Dante said. His voice was thick with a performance of concern that made my stomach turn. He is 72. He has a heart condition. He hasn't been taking his medication. I looked up at my son. He was smoothing his Italian silk tie, his face composed into a mask of the worried, dutiful child. He had just stomped the evidence of his mother's murder into dust, and now he was using his charm to bury me along with it. I don't need medication, Dante, I said, my voice low and steady. I need a lawyer. See, Tiffany sobbed, clinging to a policeman's arm. She was trembling, a perfect picture of the terrified victim. He is paranoid. He thinks everyone is against him. He lured us here. He locked the door. He had a crowbar. He was screaming about bombs and conspiracies. We were so scared. The officer looked at me. He saw the dust on my old coat. He saw the wild look in my eyes from the pain of my broken finger. He saw the poverty of my appearance compared to the wealth of my children. Sir, the officer said to me, his hand resting on his holster, we are going to take you in. Not to jail, but to the hospital. You need to be evaluated. I am not crazy, I said. Look at the wall. Look at the gas pipes. They cut the lines. We see the pipes, sir, the officer said, his tone patronizing. But this is a construction site. Pipes get cut. It doesn't mean your family is trying to kill you. They destroyed the recorder, I said. It was right there. I pointed to the pile of black plastic shards on the floor. Dante stepped in, shaking his head sadly. He smashed his own phone, officer. He got confused. He thought it was a listening device. He has been watching too many spy movies. It's the dementia. It's getting worse. The lie was so smooth, so complete that for a second I almost admired it. Dante had taken my reality and twisted it until I sounded like a lunatic. The paramedics arrived a moment later. They didn't bring a stretcher. They brought straps. I sat there as they checked my blood pressure. I watched Dante pull the senior officer aside. I couldn't hear every word, but I saw the body language. Dante was pulling out his wallet. He was showing ID. He was probably dropping names of city council members he played golf with. He was establishing his status. He was the credible witness. I was the problem to be solved. I saw the officer nod. He looked over at me with pity. We are going to put him on a 5150 hold, the officer said to the paramedics. 72 hours. Involuntary psychiatric evaluation. He is a danger to himself and others. A 5150 hold. The number rang in my ears. It meant I had no rights. It meant I couldn't sign myself out. It meant anything I said would be treated as a symptom of my illness. They were stripping me of my humanity. As they lifted me onto the gurney, I saw Dante take a pen from the officer. He was signing the commitment papers. I watched the pen move across the paper. I had taught that boy to write. I had sat at the kitchen table with him for hours when he was 5 years old, guiding his chubby hand to form the letters of his name. I had signed his report cards. I had signed the checks for his college tuition. I had signed the deed that gave him his first house. And now he was using that same hand, that same signature, to sign away my freedom. Dante, I said. He stopped writing. He didn't look up. Dante, look at me. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes were cold, dead things. There was no love left in them. Only the terrifying emptiness of a man who has sold his soul and is now just managing the transaction costs. You are doing this for money, I said. You are putting your father in a cage for insurance money. I am doing this because you are sick, Dad, he said loud enough for the police to hear. You need help. We love you too much to let you hurt yourself. The lie tasted like bile in my throat. They wheeled me out of the office. The rain had started again. The cold drops hit my face, mixing with the sweat and the dust. As they loaded me into the back of the ambulance, I saw Tiffany standing by her car. She had stopped crying. She was checking her makeup in the side mirror. She caught my eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. It wasn't an apology, it was a dismissal. To her, I was just a piece of trash that had finally been taken out. But the hardest part wasn't the handcuffs. It wasn't the pain in my broken finger which was throbbing with a dull, rhythmic agony. It wasn't even the injustice of it. The hardest part was the realization that hit me as the ambulance doors slammed shut, plunging me into darkness. I had spent my whole life protecting them. I had worked double shifts to buy them toys. I had shielded them from the harsh realities of being black in America. I had built a fortress of money and privilege around them so they would never have to suffer like I did. And in doing so, I had created monsters. I had fed them so much that they had forgotten how to hunt, and now that they were hungry, they had decided to eat me. I lay back against the stretcher as the siren began to wail. I closed my eyes. The vibration of the road traveled up through the wheels, shaking my old bones. I was alone. My wife was dead. My evidence was destroyed. My reputation was ruined, and I was being taken to a place where sanity goes to die. But as the ambulance turned onto the highway, a strange thought occurred to me. Dante had made one mistake. He had signed those papers with a pen. He thought the law was on his side. He thought the system was his weapon. But he forgot that I was an engineer. I know how systems work. I know that every structure, no matter how strong it looks, has a stress point, a weak spot, a crack that can bring the whole thing down. Dante thought he had buried me, but he didn't know that you cannot bury a seed and expect it to rot. You only teach it how to grow in the dark. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the smell of antiseptic and rubbing alcohol. 72 hours, I whispered to the empty ambulance. Give me 72 hours, Dante. And when I come out, I won't be your father anymore. I will be your reckoning. They call it a 72-hour hold, but time does not exist in a room with no windows and lights that hum with a sound that drills into your skull. Time is just a concept for free men. For me, time became a white blur of nurses with fake smiles and paper cups filled with pills that are supposed to make you forget you are a human being. The first 12 hours were the hardest. They stripped me of my clothes. They took my belt, my shoelaces, and the watch Ruby gave me for our 40th anniversary. They put me in a gown that felt like paper, leaving me shivering on a mattress that smelled of bleach and other men's despair. I lay there staring at the acoustic tiles on the ceiling, counting the little black dots. 1,402. That is how many dots were on the tile directly above my head. I counted them because if I stopped counting, I would start screaming. And if I screamed, they would win. Dante had told them I was manic. He told them I was violent. So I had to be a statue. I had to be stone. A nurse came in every 4 hours. Take this, Mr. Turner, she would say. It will help you sleep. It was a small blue pill. Thorazine, maybe. Or something newer. Something designed to turn a man's brain into pudding. I opened my mouth. I let her place the pill on my tongue. I took the cup of water. I swallowed. But I didn't swallow the pill. I spent 40 years in construction. I know how to move things without them being seen. I tucked that pill under my tongue, wedging it deep against the root, and I swallowed the water. I smiled at the nurse. I lay back down, and the moment the heavy metal door clicked shut, I sat up and spit the blue poison into the hem of the mattress. I did this 3 times. My head was pounding. My body was screaming for rest, but I needed my mind sharp. As the hours dragged on, the silence of the room forced me to go into the only place they couldn't lock up, my memory. I closed my eyes, and I wasn't in a psych ward anymore. I was back in 1974. I was standing in the mud of a construction site in South Chicago holding a shovel. Ruby was there too. She wasn't wearing a business suit then. She was wearing work boots and jeans, her hair tied back in a bandana. We were the only black contractors on the job. The bank had laughed at us when we asked for a loan for equipment. The white foreman had spit on the ground when I walked past him. They told us we couldn't pour concrete. They told us we didn't have the capital. They told us to go back to being laborers. I remembered the night we sat in our tiny kitchen looking at a stack of unpaid bills. Ruby had taken my hand. Her skin was rough from sanding drywall. Ike, she had said, her eyes burning with a fire that could melt steel. We don't ask them for a seat at the table. We build our own table. And we build it out of concrete so they can't kick it over. We worked 18-hour days. We slept in the truck. We ate sandwiches that tasted like dust. But we built that empire. Every brick, every beam, every contract was paid for with our sweat and our dignity. We took the racism, the insults, the doors slammed in our faces, and we used them as fuel. And now, 50 years later, the son who had grown up sleeping in the back of that truck, the son who had never known a day of hunger in his life, had locked me in a padded room to steal what we had bled for. The rage didn't make me hot anymore. It made me cold. It made me precise. I sat up on the edge of the bed. I am an engineer. I solve problems. And this room was just a problem. I watched the door. I timed the rotations. The morning nurse was lazy. She checked the window every 30 minutes but didn't look at the patient. The afternoon nurse was strict. She watched me swallow. That was the one time I actually had to swallow the pill, and I lost 4 hours to a dark, heavy sleep. But the night nurse, she was different. It was hour 48 when she walked in. She was a tall, black woman, maybe in her late 40s, with kind eyes and tired shoulders. She moved differently than the others. She didn't have that clinical detachment. She looked at me like I was a person. She checked my chart. Then she looked at my face. She frowned. "Mr. Turner," she whispered. "Isaiah Turner." I sat up slowly. The one pill I had taken was still making my limbs feel heavy, but I forced myself to focus. "Yes," I croaked. My throat was dry. She stepped closer, looking at the door to make sure it was closed. "You are the Isaiah Turner who owns Turner Construction." "The one who started the Ruby Turner Scholarship Fund." I nodded. "Why?" She let out a breath she had been holding. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tissue, pretending to wipe a spill on the bedside table. "My son Marcus," she said softly. "He goes to Howard University. He is in his 3rd year of engineering. We couldn't afford the tuition. We applied for everything. We were going to give up. And then he got the letter from your foundation. You paid for his books. You paid for his dorm." She looked at me and her eyes filled with tears. "You saved his future, Mr. Turner." I looked at this woman. I had signed thousands of checks in my life. I had shaken thousands of hands. I didn't know her name. I didn't know her son. But Ruby had set that fund up. Even from the grave, Ruby was still working. She was still building. "What is your name?" I asked. "Sarah," she said. "Sarah," I said, leaning forward. "My son put me in here. He is trying to steal everything. He is trying to steal the money that pays for Marcus's tuition." Sarah stiffened. She looked at the chart again. "It says you are having a psychotic break. It says you are paranoid." "Do I look paranoid to you, Sarah?" I asked. "Or do I look like a man who has been betrayed?" She looked at me. She saw the bruising on my wrist where the handcuffs had been. She saw the clarity in my eyes. She was a mother. She knew what betrayal looked like. "What do you need?" she whispered. "I need a phone," I said. "I cannot call a lawyer. My son has paid them all off. If I call a lawyer, Dante will know in 5 minutes. I need to call a friend." Sarah looked at the door. There was a camera in the hallway, but not in the room. She reached into her scrubs. She pulled out a personal cell phone. 2 minutes, she hissed. "If they catch me, I lose my license. I lose my pension." I took the phone. My hands were shaking not from fear but from adrenaline. I didn't dial 911. I didn't dial a high-priced attorney. I dialed the number of a man who lived in a trailer and smelled like sawdust. Mateo answered on the first ring. "Hello, Mateo," I whispered. "It's Ike." Mr. Ike. Mateo's voice was frantic. "Where are you? I went to the station, but they said you were transferred. I called the house, but the locks are changed. Listen to me, Mateo. I have 2 minutes. Are you safe?" "Yes. I am staying at my cousin's place in Pilsen. They don't know where I am." "Do you have the bag?" I asked. "The tool bag?" "Yes. I have it with me. Did you look inside?" There was a pause. I looked Mr. Ike. I saw the recorder, but it is broken. Dante smashed it. It is in pieces. I closed my eyes. I knew it was broken, but I needed Mateo to be my hands. "Mateo, listen to me. I need you to go to the bank. Not the company bank, the one on 4th Street, the old savings and loan, but I cannot get in, Mr. Ike. I am not family." "You don't need to get in yet," I said. "I just need you to be there tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Park across the street. Watch the door. Dante will try to go there. He needs the safety deposit box key that was on my keychain. He has your keys, Mr. Ike. The police gave them to him. I know I said, and that is why you need to be there. Because there is something inside that box he cannot get without a biometric scan. And when he fails, he will panic." I took a deep breath. "I get out in 24 hours, Mateo. They have to release me if they can't prove I am a danger." Sarah, the nurse, she is going to help me with the paperwork. When I walk out of these doors, I will have nothing. No car, no money, no home. I will be there, Matteo said firmly. I will bring my truck. Bring the truck, Matteo, and bring a sledgehammer. A sledgehammer, yes. We are done building, Matteo. It is time to start demolition. I handed the phone back to Sarah just as footsteps echoed in the hallway. She slipped it into her pocket and adjusted my blanket, her face transforming instantly into a mask of professional indifference. "Thank you," I whispered. She didn't look at me. She just squeezed my hand, a quick, firm pressure that said everything. She walked out, locking the heavy door behind her. I lay back on the thin mattress. The hum of the lights didn't bother me anymore. The smell of bleach didn't make me sick. I had a plan, I had an ally, and I had a righteous anger that was burning hotter than any fever. I closed my eyes and let the last 24 hours of my captivity begin. Dante thought he had put me in a hole. He was wrong. He had put me in a trench, and I was ready to go to war. They call it a 72-hour hold, but time does not exist in a room with no windows and lights that hum with a sound that drills into your skull. Time is just a concept for free men. For me, time became a white blur of nurses with fake smiles and paper cups filled with pills that are supposed to make you forget you are a human being. The first 12 hours were the hardest. They stripped me of my clothes. They took my belt, my shoelaces, and the watch Ruby gave me for our 40th anniversary. They put me in a gown that felt like paper, leaving me shivering on a mattress that smelled of bleach and other men's despair. I lay there staring at the acoustic tiles on the ceiling, counting the little black dots. 1,402. That is how many dots were on the tile directly above my head. I counted them because if I stopped counting, I would start screaming, and if I screamed, they would win. Dante had told them I was manic. He told them I was violent. So I had to be a statue. I had to be stone. A nurse came in every 4 hours. "Take this, Mr. Turner," she would say. "It will help you sleep." It was a small blue pill, Thorazine maybe, or something newer, something designed to turn a man's brain into pudding. I opened my mouth. I let her place the pill on my tongue. I took the cup of water. I swallowed. But I didn't swallow the pill. I spent 40 years in construction. I know how to move things without them being seen. I tucked that pill under my tongue, wedging it deep against the root, and I swallowed the water. I smiled at the nurse. I lay back down. And the moment the heavy metal door clicked shut, I sat up and spit the blue poison into the hem of the mattress. I did this 3 times. My head was pounding. My body was screaming for rest, but I needed my mind sharp. As the hours dragged on, the silence of the room forced me to go into the only place they couldn't lock up, my memory. I closed my eyes and I wasn't in a psych ward anymore. I was back in 1974. I was standing in the mud of a construction site in South Chicago holding a shovel. Ruby was there too. She wasn't wearing a business suit then. She was wearing work boots and jeans, her hair tied back in a bandana. We were the only black contractors on the job. The bank had laughed at us when we asked for a loan for equipment. The white foreman had spit on the ground when I walked past him. They told us we couldn't pour concrete. They told us we didn't have the capital. They told us to go back to being laborers. I remembered the night we sat in our tiny kitchen looking at a stack of unpaid bills. Ruby had taken my hand. Her skin was rough from sanding drywall. Ike, she had said, her eyes burning with a fire that could melt steel. We don't ask them for a seat at the table. We build our own table. And we build it out of concrete so they can't kick it over. We worked 18-hour days. We slept in the truck. We ate sandwiches that tasted like dust. But we built that empire. Every brick, every beam, every contract was paid for with our sweat and our dignity. We took the racism, the insults, the doors slammed in our faces, and we used them as fuel. And now, 50 years later, the son who had grown up sleeping in the back of that truck, the son who had never known a day of hunger in his life, had locked me in a padded room to steal what we had bled for. The rage didn't make me hot anymore. It made me cold. It made me precise. I sat up on the edge of the bed. I am an engineer. I solve problems. And this room was just a problem. I watched the door. I timed the rotations. The morning nurse was lazy. She checked the window every 30 minutes but didn't look at the patient. The afternoon nurse was strict. She watched me swallow. That was the one time I actually had to swallow the pill, and I lost 4 hours to a dark, heavy sleep. But the night nurse, she was different. It was hour 48 when she walked in. She was a tall black woman, maybe in her late 40s, with kind eyes and tired shoulders. She moved differently than the others. She didn't have that clinical detachment. She looked at me like I was a person. She checked my chart. Then she looked at my face. She frowned. "Mr. Turner," she whispered. "Isaiah Turner." I sat up slowly. The one pill I had taken was still making my limbs feel heavy, but I forced myself to focus. "Yes," I croaked. My throat was dry. She stepped closer, looking at the door to make sure it was closed. "You are the Isaiah Turner who owns Turner Construction, the one who started the Ruby Turner Scholarship Fund." I nodded. "Why?" She let out a breath she had been holding. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tissue, pretending to wipe a spill on the bedside table. "My son Marcus," she said softly. "He goes to Howard University. He is in his 3rd year of engineering. We couldn't afford the tuition. We applied for everything. We were going to give up. And then he got the letter from your foundation. You paid for his books. You paid for his dorm." She looked at me, and her eyes filled with tears. "You saved his future, Mr. Turner." I looked at this woman. I had signed thousands of checks in my life. I had shaken thousands of hands. I didn't know her name. I didn't know her son. But Ruby had set that fund up. Even from the grave, Ruby was still working. She was still building. "What is your name?" I asked. "Sarah," she said. "Sarah," I said, leaning forward. "My son put me in here. He is trying to steal everything. He is trying to steal the money that pays for Marcus's tuition." Sarah stiffened. She looked at the chart again. "It says you are having a psychotic break. It says you are paranoid." "Do I look paranoid to you, Sarah?" I asked. "Or do I look like a man who has been betrayed?" She looked at me. She saw the bruising on my wrist where the handcuffs had been. She saw the clarity in my eyes. She was a mother. She knew what betrayal looked like. "What do you need?" she whispered. "I need a phone," I said. "I cannot call a lawyer. My son has paid them all off. If I call a lawyer, Dante will know in 5 minutes. I need to call a friend." Sarah looked at the door. There was a camera in the hallway, but not in the room. She reached into her scrubs. She pulled out a personal cell phone. 2 minutes, she hissed. "If they catch me, I lose my license. I lose my pension." I took the phone. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I didn't dial 911. I didn't dial a high-priced attorney. I dialed the number of a man who lived in a trailer and smelled like sawdust. Mateo answered on the first ring. "Hello, Mateo," I whispered. "It's Ike." "Mr. Ike," Mateo's voice was frantic. "Where are you?" "I went to the station, but they said you were transferred. I called the house, but the locks are changed. Listen to me, Mateo. I have 2 minutes. Are you safe?" "Yes, I am staying at my cousin's place in Pilsen. They don't know where I am." "Do you have the bag?" I asked. "The tool bag." "Yes, I have it with me. Did you look inside?" There was a pause. I looked, Mr. Ike. I saw the recorder, but it is broken. Dante smashed it. It is in pieces. I closed my eyes. I knew it was broken, but I needed Mateo to be my hands. "Mateo, listen to me. I need you to go to the bank, not the company bank, the one on 4th Street, the old savings and loan. But I cannot get in, Mr. Ike. I am not family. You don't need to get in yet," I said. "I just need you to be there tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Park across the street. Watch the door. Dante will try to go there. He needs the safety deposit box key that was on my keychain. He has your keys, Mr. Ike. The police gave them to him." "I know," I said, "and that is why you need to be there, because there is something inside that box he cannot get without a biometric scan, and when he fails, he will panic." I took a deep breath. "I get out in 24 hours, Mateo. They have to release me if they can't prove I am a danger. Sarah, the nurse, she is going to help me with the paperwork. When I walk out of these doors, I will have nothing. No car, no money, no home." "I will be there," Mateo said firmly. "I will bring my truck. Bring the truck, Mateo. And bring a sledgehammer." "A sledgehammer." "Yes. We are done building, Mateo. It is time to start demolition." I handed the phone back to Sarah just as footsteps echoed in the hallway. She slipped it into her pocket and adjusted my blanket, her face transforming instantly into a mask of professional indifference. "Thank you," I whispered. She didn't look at me. She just squeezed my hand, a quick, firm pressure that said everything. She walked out, locking the heavy door behind her. I lay back on the thin mattress. The hum of the lights didn't bother me anymore. The smell of bleach didn't make me sick. I had a plan. I had an ally. And I had a righteous anger that was burning hotter than any fever. I closed my eyes and let the last 24 hours of my captivity begin. Dante thought he had put me in a hole. He was wrong. He had put me in a trench, and I was ready to go to war. 72 hours is 4,320 minutes. I counted every single one of them. I counted them while staring at the cracks in the ceiling tile. I counted them while eating oatmeal that tasted like wet cardboard. I counted them while listening to the screams of men who had truly lost their minds, wondering if I was slowly becoming one of them. But I wasn't. My mind was a steel trap, and every minute that passed was just another turn of the screw tightening my resolve. When the heavy metal door finally clicked open at exactly 9 a.m., I was sitting on the edge of my bed fully dressed in the wrinkled clothes I had arrived in. I had washed my face with cold water. I had smoothed my gray hair with my hands. I looked like a man who had slept in a gutter, but I held my head like the CEO of a company that built the Chicago skyline. I expected a nurse. I expected Sarah. Instead, I saw Dante. He walked in with a confidence that made my blood boil. He was wearing a fresh navy suit, holding a leather portfolio under his arm like a weapon. He didn't look at me with love. He looked at me with the pity one has for a sick dog that needs to be put down. "Good morning, Dad," he said, keeping his distance. "You look terrible." I looked at him. I didn't speak. I saved my words. "I spoke to the director," Dante continued, tapping the leather portfolio. "We all agree that you are not ready to go home. You are unstable. The incident at the construction site proving it, so I have handled everything." He pulled a stack of documents out of the folder. They were thick, dense with legal jargon. I recognized the header immediately. "Emergency conservatorship. I am taking over, Dad," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was supposed to be comforting. "I have the judge's signature on the preliminary order. We are going to transfer you to a private facility in Wisconsin. It's nice there. Quiet. You won't have to worry about bills or businesses or imaginary conspiracies anymore." He held the pen out to me, but he wasn't asking for my autograph. He was asking for my surrender. "Just sign the voluntary transfer," he said. "It will make it easier. If you don't, the orderlies will have to sedate you for transport. I don't want to see that." I looked at the pen. I looked at my son. He had it all planned out. The kidnapping, the imprisonment, the theft of a lifetime of hard work. I stood up. My knees popped, but I didn't sway. "I am not going to Wisconsin, Dante," I said. Dante sighed, shaking his head. "Don't make this difficult. You are legally incapacitated. The doctor is coming in right now to sign the release into my custody." As if on cue, the door opened again. But it wasn't the nurse. It was Dr. Aris, the chief psychiatrist. He was a small man with glasses and a face that revealed nothing. He walked in, looked at Dante, looked at me, and then looked down at his clipboard. "Dr. Aris," Dante said, stepping forward with his winning smile. "I have the transfer papers ready. My father is ready to go to the facility I selected." Dr. Aris didn't smile back. He adjusted his glasses and flipped a page on the chart. "Mr. Turner," the doctor said, addressing me, not Dante. "How are you feeling this morning?" "I am hungry, doctor," I said. "And I am angry. But I am not crazy." Dr. Aris nodded slowly. He turned to Dante. "Mr. Turner, I cannot sign these transfer papers." Dante's smile faltered. "Excuse me, the court order says I can hold him for 72 hours for evaluation." Dr. Aris interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "It says that if I find him to be a danger to himself or others due to a mental defect, I must recommend further treatment." "And he is a danger," Dante snapped, his voice rising. "He attacked me. He thinks there are bombs in the walls." Dr. Aris held up a hand. "We ran a full toxicology screen. Mr. Turner, your father has no drugs in his system. We ran a cognitive assessment. He scored 29 out of 30, which is higher than most of my staff. And we monitored his behavior. He has been calm, cooperative, and lucid." "He is faking it," Dante yelled. "He is a manipulator." The blood work also shows that he is severely dehydrated and suffering from malnutrition. Dr. Aris continued, ignoring the outburst. "Which explains the irritability and the confusion you described. This man is not psychotic. He is exhausted. He is a grieving widower who has been pushed to his limit. I am a doctor, not a jailer. I will not sign a commitment order for a sane man." Dante stared at the doctor. His face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. "You are making a mistake," Dante hissed. "If he walks out of here, whatever happens is on your head." "I am discharging him," Dr. Aris said, closing the folder with a snap. "Mr. Turner, you are free to go." I looked at Dante. For the first time in 3 days, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf that just chewed its leg out of a trap. "Thank you, doctor," I said. I walked past Dante. I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the sweat of his fear. I brushed his shoulder with mine. He didn't move. He just stood there paralyzed by the one thing he hadn't calculated: integrity. I walked down the long white hallway. I pushed open the double doors. The automatic glass doors slid apart and the air of Chicago hit me. It was cold, smelling of exhaust and rain, but it tasted like freedom. I stood on the sidewalk taking a deep breath. Mr. Ike. I looked across the parking lot. Leaning against his beat-up Ford truck was Mateo, and standing next to him was a man in a sharp gray suit holding a briefcase. A lawyer. Mateo had done exactly what I asked. He had brought the cavalry. I started walking toward them. My legs felt light. I was ready. I was going to get in that truck, go to the bank, and end this. But then I heard footsteps behind me. "You think you won?" I stopped. I turned around. Dante was standing at the entrance of the hospital. He wasn't chasing me. He was leaning against a pillar lighting a cigarette. He looked relaxed again. The panic was gone, replaced by a cruel, arrogant smirk. "I didn't win, Dante," I said. "I just survived. And now I am going to the police." "Go ahead," Dante said, blowing smoke into the air. "Go to the police. Tell them your story. Without the recorder, it is just your word. And while you are doing that, where are you going to sleep?" "I have my house," I said. Dante laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "No, you don't. I had the locks changed yesterday. For security purposes, of course. Since you were in a psych ward, the property was vulnerable. I have the keys. I will call a locksmith," I said, though a cold knot was forming in my stomach, "and pay him with what Dante asked." I reached for my wallet. It was empty. The hospital had returned it to me, but my cards were gone. "I canceled your credit cards, Dad," Dante said, flicking the ash off his cigarette. "And I froze the joint checking account. As your power of attorney, I have a duty to protect your assets from your erratic behavior. You have $0. You have no access to your home. You have no car." He took a drag of the cigarette and smiled. "You are a homeless old man, Dad. You are a trespasser on your own property. If you try to break in, I will have you arrested. And this time you won't go to a hospital. You will go to county jail." He pushed off the pillar and walked toward his BMW. "Go stay with your Mexican friend," he called out over his shoulder. "I give you a week. A week before you come crawling back to me begging for a bed in that nursing home. And when you do, the price is going to be a lot higher." He got in his car. The engine purred to life. He drove past me, not even looking in my direction. I stood there on the sidewalk, the wind cutting through my thin jacket. I looked at my hands. They were empty. I had built a company worth millions. I had raised a family. I had been a pillar of the community. And in the span of 3 days, my own son had stripped me naked. I had nothing. No money, no home, no leverage. Mateo ran up to me, looking at Dante's retreating car with hate in his eyes. "Mr. Ike, are you okay?" "What did he say?" I looked at Mateo. I looked at the lawyer who was checking his watch, clearly wondering if he was going to get paid. He said, "I am dead," I whispered. Mateo grabbed my arm. "You are not dead, boss. You are here. We have the truck. We have the sledgehammer." I looked at Mateo. He was right. Dante had taken the luxury. He had taken the comfort. But he had forgotten where I came from. He forgot that before I was a CEO, I was a man who dug ditches. He forgot that you don't need a credit card to swing a hammer. He thinks I am homeless, I said, my voice hardening into steel. But he forgot that the bank opens in 20 minutes. I climbed into the passenger seat of Mateo's rusted truck. The seat was torn, and the cab smelled of old coffee and drywall dust. It was the best smell in the world. "Drive, Mateo," I said. "Where to?" "To the bank," I said. "I might not have a key to my house, but I have a fingerprint, and that is the one key he couldn't steal." As we pulled out of the hospital parking lot, I didn't look back. I looked forward. I wasn't Ike the victim anymore. I was Ike the demolition man, and I was about to bring the whole house down. The metal walls of a shipping container do not hold heat. They amplify the cold. They turn the wind outside into a hollow drumming sound that reminds you with every beat that you are not in a home. You are in a box. A box designed to hold cargo, not a human being. And certainly not a 72-year-old man who 3 days ago slept on Egyptian cotton sheets in a house with a heated driveway. I sat on a folding camp cot, my back pressed against the corrugated steel wall. My breath came out in white puffs. I was wearing my suit jacket, now wrinkled and stained with the grease of the hospital gurney and the dust of the construction site. It was the only layer I had. This was my new reality. I was Isaiah Turner. I had built skyscrapers. I had poured the foundations for libraries and banks. I had employed hundreds of men. And now I was a squatter in a construction yard in the industrial district, hiding from my own son like a fugitive. The shame was a physical weight. It sat heavy in my gut, heavier than the hunger. I looked around the container. Mateo had tried to make it comfortable. There was a small space heater buzzing in the corner, fighting a losing battle against the Chicago chill. There was a hot plate. There was a stack of architectural magazines on a crate. This was Mateo's office, his break room, and sometimes his bedroom when deadlines were tight. Now it was my sanctuary, and that humiliated me more than anything. I had been the one who gave Mateo his first big contract. I was the mentor, the patron, and here I was eating his instant noodles, shivering in his spare blanket, depending on his charity to survive the night. The door to the container creaked open. A gust of icy wind blew in, swirling the dust on the floor. Mateo stepped inside, quickly closing the door behind him. He was carrying a plastic bag that smelled of grease and spices. Tacos. "Eat, Mr. Ike," he said, placing the bag on the overturned cable spool that served as a table. "You need your strength." I looked at the food. My stomach growled, but my throat was tight. "I cannot pay you back for this, Mateo," I said, my voice raspy. "You know that, right? I have nothing." Dante took the accounts. He took the cards. He even took the change out of my dresser drawer. Mateo stopped unpacking the food. He looked at me, his face serious under the harsh light of the single bulb hanging from the ceiling. "You think I do this for money?" he asked. "You run a business, Mateo," I said bitterly. "Everything is about money. That is what my son taught me. Blood doesn't matter. History doesn't matter. Only the balance sheet matters." Mateo shook his head. He pulled up a plastic bucket and sat down across from me. "You are wrong, boss. Your son is a fool. He thinks value is what is in the bank. But you taught me that value is what is in the man. You gave me a chance when no one else would hire a small-time contractor with an accent. You invited me to your Christmas party. You treated me like an equal. That is debt I can never repay with a taco." I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. "I lost the recorder, Mateo," I whispered. "That was our only shot. It is gone, smashed into a million pieces." Mateo took a bite of his food, chewing slowly. He didn't look worried. In fact, he looked almost bored. "I know," he said. "You know I looked up. I told you on the phone. But you don't understand. That wasn't just audio. That was a confession. That was the murder weapon. And I let him destroy it." Mateo reached into the pocket of his heavy work coat. He moved deliberately without haste. "Mr. Ike," he said, "I have been a contractor in this city for 20 years. I have worked for good people, and I have worked for snakes. I have had clients refuse to pay me after I built their whole house. I have had inspectors lie about my permits." He pulled his hand out. He was holding a small silver object. "I learned a long time ago," he continued. "If you find something on a job site that looks like trouble, you don't just call the owner. You make a copy. Because rich people have a habit of making evidence disappear." He placed the object on the cable spool between us. It was a USB drive. I stared at it. I couldn't breathe. "When I found the box in the wall," Mateo said, "before I called you, I plugged it into my laptop. I wanted to see if it was working. I saw the files, hundreds of hours of audio. I didn't listen to all of it, but I saw the timestamps. I saw the file from October 14th, 2 years ago." He tapped the USB drive with his rough finger. "I copied the whole drive, boss. It took 20 minutes. That is why I sounded so nervous when I called you. I was watching the progress bar, praying you wouldn't show up before it finished." I looked at Mateo. Tears pricked my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but tears of relief so profound it felt like my soul was exhaling. "You have it," I whispered. "You have the recording. I have everything," Mateo said. "Dante smashed a plastic box. He smashed a memory card. But he didn't smash the data." I reached out and grabbed Mateo's hand. I squeezed it hard. "You just saved my life, Mateo." "Let us see what we saved," Mateo said. He pulled his battered laptop out from under his cot. It was covered in dust and stickers, but it booted up. He plugged in the drive. The screen filled with file names, date, time, duration. There it was. October 14th, 2:45 p.m. "Play it," I said. Mateo clicked the file. The sound filled the small metal container. Once again I heard the static. I heard the clinking of tools. I heard Dante's arrogance and Jamal's fear. I heard my wife's voice. Hearing it the second time was harder than the first. In the daylight, surrounded by police, I had been running on adrenaline. Now, in the quiet of the night, listening to Ruby's last moments while I sat in a cold box, it broke my heart all over again. I listened to the struggle. I listened to the thud. I listened to my sons running away. But this time, I wasn't just listening for the crime. I was listening for something else. My engineer's brain was looking for a solution. "Keep playing," I said, wiping my eyes. "Don't stop it where I stopped it before. Let it run." "But they left," Matteo said. "It is just silence. Play it," I commanded. The recording continued. Heavy breathing, the sound of gas hissing softly from the cut pipe. Then a groan. Ruby was still alive. She was waking up. "My God," I whispered. She was alive. On the recording, there was the sound of dragging. She was trying to crawl. "Dante, Jamal," she rasped. Her voice was weak, barely a whisper. She was trying to call for help. Then there was a rustling sound, like she was reaching into her pocket. "The code," she whispered to herself. It sounded like she was delirious. The pain must have been unbearable. "They want the money," she gasped. "They want the safe." I leaned closer to the laptop speakers. "Not Dante's birthday. Not anymore," she whispered. I held my breath. Trust the builder," she said. I looked at Matteo. He was staring at the speaker, his eyes wide. "Trust the builder," Matteo repeated. "She changed it." Ruby's voice faded in and out. "Changed it yesterday, to the only honest man." Then she said a date. July 12th, 7/12, then silence. The recording ran for another hour, capturing nothing but the hiss of gas until the battery on the recorder must have died or gone into standby. I sat back, stunned. "July 12th, I said. Matteo looked at me. His face was pale. "Mr. Ike," he said softly, "that is my birthday." I looked at him. Of course it was. Ruby knew, I said. My voice was trembling. She knew Dante was stealing. She knew the boys were rotten. She was planning to cut them off. That is why she was in the office that night. She was probably rewriting her will. She was changing the access codes. I looked at the young Mexican man sitting across from me. "She trusted you, Matteo. She always said you were the son she wished she had. She said you had hands that knew how to work and a heart that knew how to care." Matteo looked down, ashamed of the praise. "Mrs. Ruby was a good woman. She always asked about my kids. She sent them birthday cards. She changed the combination to the main safe at the bank to your birthday," I said. "Not mine. Not Dante's. Yours." I stood up. The cold was gone. I felt a fire in my chest. "Dante has my keys," I said, pacing the small length of the container. "He has the physical key to the safety deposit box. But at that old bank, you need two things to open a box. You need the key and you need the keypad code." "Dante thinks the code is his birthday," I said. "Or mine. Or our anniversary. He has probably tried them all. That is why he hasn't emptied the accounts yet. That is why he was so desperate to get the conservatorship. He needs a court order to drill that box open because he doesn't have the code." I turned to Matteo. "But we have the code." "But we don't have the key," Matteo argued. "Dante has it." I smiled. A grim, dangerous smile. "Dante is a businessman," I said. "He is lazy. He has the key on my key ring. He probably put it in his pocket. He is going to go to that bank tomorrow morning the second it opens. He is going to try to force his way in with his court papers." I grabbed my coat. "We don't need the key, Matteo. We just need to be there when he tries to use it." "What are we going to do?" Matteo asked, standing up. "We are going to let him open the door," I said. "And then we are going to walk through it." I looked at the USB drive on the table. "Keep that safe, Matteo. That is our insurance policy. But tomorrow we are not going to court. We are going to the bank." I lay back down on the cot. The metal walls didn't feel like a prison anymore. They felt like a bunker, a command center. "Get some sleep, Matteo," I said. "Tomorrow we take back the company." I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I replayed Ruby's voice in my head. Trust the builder. She had left me a map. She had left me a weapon. And she had left me the one ally who wouldn't stab me in the back. Dante thought he had buried me in the dirt. He forgot that dirt is where the foundation starts, and I was about to pour a foundation that would trap him forever. The morning couldn't come fast enough. The heavy brass doors of First National Bank on 4th Street are not designed for people like me. Not anymore. They are designed for men in Italian suits and women with purses that cost more than a Honda Civic. They are designed to intimidate. But as I stood on the sidewalk watching the reflection of Matteo's rusted Ford truck in the polished glass, I didn't feel intimidated. I felt a strange sense of ownership. I poured the foundation of this bank in 1985. I supervised the installation of the limestone pillars. I knew that beneath the marble floors and the velvet ropes there was just concrete and steel, the same as any other building. Matteo turned off the engine. The truck shuddered and died with a loud cough that made a woman in a Chanel coat turn and glare at us. "Are you ready, boss?" Matteo asked. He was gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. He looked terrified. He was a brown man in work boots about to walk into a fortress of old money. He knew the unwritten rules of this country better than anyone. I opened the door and stepped out. The wind was biting, cutting through my thin, dirty jacket. I hadn't shaved in 3 days. My eyes were red from the sleepless night in the shipping container. I looked like a vagrant. I looked like exactly the kind of person security would drag out by the collar. But I had something the security guards didn't have. I had the truth. "Let's go, Matteo," I said. "Keep your head up. You are with me." We walked through the revolving doors. The silence of the lobby hit us instantly. It was the hushed, reverent silence of a cathedral smelling of floor wax and money. The air conditioning was cold. Tellers stood behind high glass partitions moving cash with practiced indifference. A security guard, a young man with a bored expression, stepped forward as we approached the center of the room. He looked at my boots. He looked at the bandage on my broken finger. "Sir," he started, raising a hand, "I am going to have to ask you to Isaiah." The voice came from the back of the room. It was sharp, authoritative, and familiar. I looked past the guard. Standing behind the mahogany desk in the corner was Eleanor Gable. She was the branch manager. She was 70 years old with hair like spun silver and a spine of steel. She had been at my wedding. She had been at Ruby's funeral. Eleanor walked around her desk, her heels clicking on the marble. She waved the guard away with a flick of her hand. "Isaiah Turner," she whispered as she got closer. Her eyes scanned my face, taking in the exhaustion and the grime. "My God, we heard you were in the hospital." Dante said. She stopped. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. "Dante says a lot of things, Eleanor," I said, my voice rough from disuse. "He says I am crazy. He says I am a danger to society." "He was here, Isaiah," she said, lowering her voice to a hush. She took my hands. Her skin was soft, warm, and dry. "He was here yesterday morning. He came in like he owned the place. He was waving a court order around. He was shouting at my tellers. It was awful." I tightened my grip on her hands. "Did you let him in, Eleanor?" She straightened her back, looking up at me with a fierce loyalty that almost brought me to my knees. "I told him that at First National we respect the rules," she said. "I told him that a power of attorney grants access to checking accounts, not to the private vault. I told him that without the biometric scan and the secondary passcode, not even the President of the United States gets into Ruby's box." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "He tried to guess it, didn't he?" I asked. "He tried everything," Eleanor said with a scowl. "He tried his birthday. He tried yours. He tried your anniversary. He tried the date the company was founded. When the system locked him out after 3 attempts, he kicked the wall. He was desperate, Isaiah." I have never seen a man look so desperate. I nodded. "Thank you, Eleanor." "You have no idea what you did." "I need to get into that box, Eleanor," I said. She looked at me. She saw the lack of ID. She saw that I didn't have my key. Technically, she should have shown me the door. But Eleanor knew the difference between the law and what is right. "I don't have my key," I admitted. "Dante took it when he had me committed." She reached into the pocket of her blazer and pulled out a heavy ring of master keys. "If you have the code, Isaiah," she said softly, "then you are the owner. Come with me." We walked toward the heavy steel gate that separated the lobby from the vault. Matteo walked behind us, his work boots squeaking on the pristine floor, his eyes wide as he took in the gold leaf on the ceiling. We descended the stairs into the cool, recycled air of the underground vault. The walls were lined with thousands of small metal drawers floor to ceiling. Each one was a coffin for secrets. "Box 712, I said. Eleanor led us to the back corner. She found the box. She inserted her master key into the first slot. "You have to enter the code on the keypad," she said, pointing to a small digital pad on the wall, "and you have to scan your thumb." I stepped up to the scanner. I placed my rough, calloused thumb on the glass. A green light flashed. Identity confirmed. then the keypad. I remembered Ruby's voice on the recording, the voice of a dying woman leaving a breadcrumb trail for her husband. Trust the builder. Changed it to the only honest man. I looked at Mateo. 712, I whispered. I punched in the numbers. 0, 7, 1, 2. There was a heavy mechanical clunk. The lock on the box disengaged. Eleanor turned her key. The small metal door swung open. I reached inside. My hand was trembling. I expected to feel the cold weight of gold bars. I expected to feel stacks of cash wrapped in rubber bands. I expected the millions that Dante had been willing to kill his own mother for. But the box was light. I pulled out the metal tray. It was almost empty. There was no money. There were no diamonds, there were no bearer bonds, there was just a single thick file folder bound in blue velvet. I carried the tray to the small viewing table in the center of the room. Mateo stood on one side, Eleanor on the other. I opened the folder. The title page stared up at me in bold black letters. The Ruby Turner Irrevocable Trust. I turned the page. I began to read. And as I read, the air in the room seemed to shift. The weight on my shoulders began to lift, replaced by a sense of awe. My wife was a genius. She was playing chess while we were all playing checkers. Dated 5 years ago, the document detailed the transfer of every single asset we owned. The construction company, the heavy equipment, the land deeds, the stocks, and the real estate. I flipped to the section on real estate. My finger traced the lines. Asset A, the commercial office building at 4500 Martin Luther King Drive, transferred to the trust. Asset B, the residential property at 12 Oakwood Lane, my house, transferred to the trust, and then I saw it. Asset C, the residential property at 88 Highland Park. I looked at Mateo. That is Dante's house, I whispered. I read the clause underneath. The occupant Dante Turner is granted a revocable life estate license to reside in the property subject to the discretion of the trustee. This license does not constitute ownership. The property cannot be sold mortgaged or leveraged by the occupant. I started to laugh. It started as a chuckle dry and scratchy, and then it grew into a full-bellied laugh that echoed off the steel walls of the vault. He doesn't own it, I said, slamming my hand on the table. He doesn't own any of it. He has been strutting around like a king, driving cars he bought with loans against equity he never had. He has been living in a house that belongs to this folder. I flipped to the back of the document. Beneficiary designation. My heart stopped. This was it. If Dante wasn't the owner who was the beneficiary, who got the money, I read the name. Primary beneficiary, the Ruby Turner Foundation for Urban Development. Sole trustee with absolute discretion. I held my breath. Isaiah Ike Turner. And underneath my name in handwriting that made my eyes blur with tears was a note. In the event of Isaiah Turner's incapacity or death, the position of successor trustee shall pass to Mateo Garcia. I looked at Mateo. He was reading over my shoulder. He saw his name. He gasped, stepping back, his hand covering his mouth. Me, he whispered. She trusted me with everything. She knew Mateo, I said. She knew that if I died, Dante would tear this legacy apart. She knew you were the only one who would build, not destroy. I looked at the document again. There was one more paper clipped to the back. It was a letter. It wasn't written in legal jargon. It was written on her personal stationery. My dearest Ike, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. And it probably means our sons have broken your heart. I am sorry I didn't tell you about the trust. I knew you would never want to believe the worst about them. You love them too much. You always saw the little boys they used to be, not the men they became. But I saw the way Dante looked at the books. I saw the way Jamal followed him. I had to protect what we built. I had to protect you. They will try to take it, Ike. They will try to bully you. But they can't touch the trust. It is ironclad. You hold the keys. You hold the power. Use it. Teach them the lesson we failed to teach them when they were children. Make them earn their way back to humanity. Or cut them loose. I love you, my builder. Ruby. I closed the folder. I ran my hand over the velvet cover. I felt her presence in the room. She hadn't just left me money. She had left me a sword. She had left me a shield. I looked up at Eleanor. Can I take this? I asked. "You are the trustee, Isaiah," she said, wiping a tear from her cheek. "It belongs to you. It always has." I picked up the file. It felt heavier than gold. It felt like justice. "Dante thinks I am homeless," I said to Matteo. "He thinks he locked me out of my own life. He thinks he won the game because he stole the pieces." I walked toward the vault door. "But he is living in my house, Matteo. He is driving on my driveway. And he is about to find out that his lease has just expired." Matteo grinned. It was a fierce, sharp grin. "Do we still need the sledgehammer, boss?" I looked at the file in my hand. "No," I said. "We don't need a sledgehammer to break down the door, but bring it anyway. I have a feeling we might need to renovate the walls where he hid his secrets." We walked out of the vault. We walked through the lobby. The security guard nodded at me this time. I wasn't a homeless man anymore. I was the man who owned the building he was standing in. We stepped out into the sunlight. The city of Chicago looked different now. It didn't look like a place of struggle. It looked like a chessboard. And I had just been handed the queen. "Let's go, Matteo," I said, climbing into the truck. "Where to?" "To Dante's house," I said. "I think it is time for an eviction." As the truck roared to life, I pulled my phone out. It was a burner phone Matteo had bought me, but it worked. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Who are you calling?" Matteo asked. "The sheriff," I said. "I need an escort. I want to make sure my son receives his eviction notice in person." The engine revved and we merged into traffic. The hunt was over. The execution was about to begin. The atmosphere inside the law office of Sterling and Associates was suffocating. It was a heavy, pressurized silence that seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the room. The only sound was the rhythmic mocking tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, marking the seconds of a life that was about to change forever. Dante sat on one side of the massive mahogany desk, his body language screaming arrogance. He leaned back in the expensive leather chair, one leg crossed over the other, tapping his fingers impatiently on the armrest. He checked his gold watch for the third time in 5 minutes, making a show of how inconvenient this meeting was for him. Across from him sat his father, Isaiah Ike Turner. The old man was a statue. He sat with his back straight, his hands clasped calmly on the table, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere in the distance. He looked like a man who had made peace with the storm. Dante finally let out a loud, exaggerated sigh, breaking the silence. He looked at the lawyer, then at his father with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Come on, Dad," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We all know how this ends. Let's just sign the papers so I can get out of here. I have a lunch reservation at 1 o'clock with the investors, and I really don't want to be late." He chuckled, a dry sound that bounced off the walls. He truly believed he had won. For months he had maneuvered, manipulated, and pressured his father. He thought today was just a formality, a surrender ceremony where the old lion would finally hand over the pride to the young king. Mr. Sterling, the family attorney who had served the Turners for 40 years, didn't look up. He was a man of few words, known for his steel-trap mind and icy demeanor. He adjusted his spectacles, sliding them down his nose, and continued to arrange a stack of files with agonizing slowness. Without making eye contact, Sterling spoke, his voice gravelly and serious. "Dante, I would strongly suggest you cancel that lunch reservation. This meeting is going to take longer than you anticipate, and frankly, after you hear what I am about to read, I doubt you will have the appetite to eat anything at all." Dante frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. He slammed his hand on the table, leaning forward. "What kind of game is this, Sterling? Stop stalling." The office building, the estate in the countryside, the investment accounts, they are all under the family holding company, and as the CEO, I have the authority. Dad agreed to step down. That's why we are here. Ike remained silent. He didn't flinch at his son's outburst. He simply gave a microscopic nod to the lawyer. That was the signal. Sterling reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document bound in a dark blue leather folder. He placed it in the center of the desk with a reverence usually reserved for holy scriptures. He opened it, cleared his throat, and began to read. The words were precise, legal, and devastating. He stated that according to the latest amendment of the Turner Family Trust executed and notarized exactly 6 months ago, the structure of ownership had been fundamentally altered. Dante rolled his eyes, thinking this was just legal jargon. But then Sterling paused, looked Dante dead in the eye, and delivered the first blow. The document stated that the sole beneficiary with absolute and total control over all assets, properties, and liquid funds within the trust is Mr. Isaiah Ike Turner. The smirk on Dante's face froze. It didn't disappear instantly. It just turned into a confused grimace. He blinked his brain, refusing to process the words. "Excuse me," he stammered. "What did you just say? I am the only son. I am the legal heir." Sterling ignored the interruption and turned the page. His voice remained steady, devoid of emotion, like a judge reading a death sentence. He continued reading the clause regarding succession. It stated that upon the passing of Mr. Isaiah Turner, the entirety of the trust's assets would not be distributed to any family members or descendants. Instead, the full estate would be liquidated and donating 100% of the proceeds to the Veterans Support Network and the Children's Hope Foundation. The document explicitly stated that the children of Isaiah Turner, specifically Dante Turner, were to receive absolutely nothing. Zero. Not a single cent. Dante shot up from his chair as if he had been electrocuted. His face turned a deep shade of crimson. "This is insanity," he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at his father. "You senile old man. You've been brainwashed. I will sue you. I will drag you through every court in this country. You cannot cut me out of my own birthright. This is my money." For the first time since they entered the room, Ike moved. He slowly turned his head and looked up at his son. His eyes were not the eyes of a victim. They were sharp, clear, and burning with a cold fire. "Sit down," Dante Ike said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a weight of authority that made the room vibrate. "The show isn't over yet. You think losing the inheritance is the worst thing that's going to happen to you today? You are mistaken. That was just the opening act." Dante froze. There was something in his father's tone that terrified him. A primal warning bell went off in his head. He slowly sank back into his chair, his legs feeling weak. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. "What are you talking about?" he whispered. Sterling turned his chair and faced the wall behind him. There was a hidden wall safe concealed behind a painting. He spun the dial, the clicks echoing in the silent room. He opened the heavy steel door and retrieved a black envelope. Returning to the desk, he slid the contents out. It was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of a contract, and a high-resolution photograph. He slid them across the mahogany surface until they rested directly in front of Dante. Dante looked down and his blood ran cold. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a ghost. It was a loan agreement, a promissory note for $3 million. But this wasn't a bank loan. The logo at the top of the page was a stylized serpent wrapped around a dagger. Everyone in the city knew that symbol. It belonged to the Viper Syndicate, a ruthless underground lending organization that didn't use collection agencies. They used baseball bats and concrete shoes. The borrower's name was clearly printed Dante Turner. The collateral listed for the loan was the Turner Tower, the 40-story office building that was the jewel of the family empire. And at the bottom of the page, next to Dante's signature, was another signature. Isaiah Ike Turner, listed as the co-signer and property owner. Dante's hands began to shake uncontrollably. He looked up, his eyes wide with panic. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry. So what he managed to choke out, his voice cracking. "I needed capital. The business needed cash flow. You wouldn't give it to me, so I found my own way. You signed it, Dad. I have your signature right here. You can't deny it. You were probably drunk when you signed it, but a signature is a signature." Ike let out a short, humorless laugh. "It was a sad sound, Dante," he said softly. "Do you really think I am that far gone? I haven't touched a drop of alcohol in 20 years, not since my first heart attack. You know that." Sterling placed another document on the table. "This is a forensic handwriting analysis," the lawyer explained. "We took the liberty of having the signature examined. It is a forgery, Dante. A very good one, I admit. You must have practiced tracing your father's signature from old documents for hours, but it is a forgery nonetheless." Dante slammed his fist on the table, trying to regain control of the situation. "Who cares?" he yelled. "The Vipers don't care about forensic analysis. They have a contract. They gave me the money, and the building is the collateral. If I can't pay, they take the building. That's how it works. You're going to lose the tower anyway, old man." Sterling took off his glasses and folded them deliberately. He leaned in, his eyes locking onto Dante's with a look of pity mixed with contempt. "And that, Dante, is where you have made a fatal miscalculation." The lawyer tapped the blue folder containing the trust amendment. "You see, Dante, because we transferred the ownership of the Turner Tower into the trust 6 months ago, your father as an individual no longer owned the building when this loan was signed last month. The building belongs to the trust, a separate legal entity. Even if the signature were real, Isaiah Ike Turner did not have the right to pledge the building as collateral for your personal loan. Sterling paused to let the words sink in. Legally speaking, the mortgage on the building is void. It is invalid. The Viper Syndicate cannot touch the building. It is protected by the trust. They cannot foreclose on it. They cannot seize it. The collateral you offered them doesn't exist. The room spun around Dante. He felt nausea rising in his throat. He gripped the edge of the desk to keep from falling over. "Wait," he gasped. If the collateral is void, then what happens to the debt I took the money? I took the $3 million. Ike looked at his son with a mixture of sorrow and finality. You took the money, Dante. You spent the money, and now you owe the money. But you don't owe it to a bank that will simply file a lawsuit. You owe it to the Viper Syndicate, and you secured that debt with a lie. Sterling's voice was soft, almost a whisper now. You committed fraud against the most dangerous criminals in the city, Dante. You sold them a building you didn't own. When they find out that their contract is worthless and that they cannot take the tower, they are not going to come looking for your father. They are not going to come to this law office. Dante's breathing became ragged. He realized the trap he had walked into. He had thought he was the predator, but he was the prey. He had borrowed money from sharks thinking he could feed them his father's arm, but his father had just put on armor. Now the sharks would turn on the only meat available. But the money. Dante whispered, tears welling up in his eyes. I spent it. I paid off my gambling debts. I lost the rest in the futures market. I don't have it. I don't have $3 million. Dad, you have to help me. You can't let them kill me. Just sell the building. Please. I'm your son. Ike stood up slowly. He looked tired, older than he had ever looked before. He buttoned his jacket and picked up his hat. He looked at the weeping, trembling man-child before him. I am not letting them do anything, Dante Ike said. You did this. You made the choice to steal, to forge, and to deal with devils. I protected the family legacy from you. Now you must protect yourself from your own choices. Ike turned to the lawyer. Come, Sterling. We have a meeting with the charity directors. Dad. Dante screamed, scrambling out of his chair, falling to his knees. Dad, please don't walk out that door. They will kill me. Ike paused at the heavy oak door. He didn't turn around. He just spoke one last sentence into the heavy air of the room. Then perhaps for the first time in your life, you should start praying, son. The door clicked shut. Dante was left alone in the silence, the ticking of the clock sounding like a countdown. He looked at the black phone on the desk. It started to ring. He didn't need to look at the caller ID to know who it was. The Vipers were calling to collect, and Dante Turner had nothing left to pay with but his life. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of velvet diamonds and the clinking of expensive crystal. The air smelled of imported orchids and the heavy, intoxicating scent of money. This was the night Dante and Tiffany had been waiting for. It was the official launch gala for the Turner Lofts project. Their plan was ambitious and in their minds foolproof. They were pre-selling luxury apartments in the Turner Tower, the very building they had already secretly leveraged to the mob, and the very building that technically no longer belonged to them. But they didn't believe that part. They were convinced that their father's threats were just the ramblings of a powerless old man. They were the future. They were the golden children. Dante stood at the center of the room, holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by a circle of eager investors. He looked every inch the successful developer. His Italian suit fit perfectly. His smile was bright and practiced, and his handshake was firm. He was selling them a dream. He spoke about the infinity pool on the roof, the private elevator access, and the smart home technology that would redefine urban living. He was collecting checks, large checks, deposit money from wealthy doctors, lawyers, and foreign investors who believed in the Turner name. Tiffany was working the other side of the room. She was dazzling in a silver evening gown that hugged her figure, laughing at jokes that weren't funny and promising penthouses that she had no legal right to sell. They were high on adrenaline. They felt untouchable. They had ignored the meeting with the lawyer earlier in the week, convincing themselves it was a scare tactic. They believed possession was 9/10 of the law, and they possessed the keys, the office, and the audacity. They were celebrating their victory before the game had even finished. Then the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Usually the arrival of a guest late in the evening goes unnoticed, but this was different. The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly like the drop in pressure before a thunderstorm. Heads began to turn. conversations trailed off. The silence started at the back of the room and rolled forward like a wave until it reached the stage where a jazz band was playing soft background music. Even the band stopped playing, sensing the change in the room. Isaiah Ike Turner stood in the doorway. He was not the man Dante and Tiffany had grown used to seeing. He was not the tired, shuffling old man in the stained cardigan who sat in the corner of family dinners. He was not the invisible father they had learned to look through. Tonight, Ike was a king returning to his court. He was wearing a tuxedo that was clearly decades old, but it was cut from the finest black wool and fit him with a military precision. His white shirt was crisp and starched. His bow tie was perfectly knotted, and his shoes shone under the chandeliers. He stood tall, his shoulders back, his chin raised. He carried a silver-tipped cane not because he needed it to walk, but as a scepter of authority. Dante saw him and nearly dropped his glass. The color drained from his face. He exchanged a panicked look with Tiffany across the room. She looked furious. Her eyes narrowed into slits as she made a beeline for her brother. She whispered aggressively into his ear, asking what is he doing here, and telling Dante to get rid of him immediately because he was going to embarrass them. She hissed that he looked like a relic from a museum and that he was going to ruin the aesthetic of their modern launch. Tiffany signaled frantically to the head of security, a large man named Bruno who was standing near the exit. She pointed at her father with a manicured finger and made a cutting motion across her throat. Bruno nodded and began to move toward Ike. But something remarkable happened. As Ike walked into the room, he didn't look like someone who could be escorted out. He walked with a slow, deliberate rhythm. People instinctively parted to let him through. He nodded politely to old business associates he hadn't seen in years. Men who had forgotten him, or who thought he was retired or senile, suddenly straightened up and buttoned their jackets as he passed. They recognized the energy. It was the energy of the man who had built half the skyline of the city before Dante was even born. Bruno, the security guard, intercepted Ike halfway to the stage. He put a heavy hand on Ike's shoulder and leaned in to whisper a threat. But before he could speak, Ike stopped. He didn't look at Bruno. He simply placed his hand over the guard's hand, gripping it with a strength that shocked the younger man and removed it from his shoulder. Ike looked Bruno in the eye, not with anger but with a calm, terrifying intensity. He told the guard quietly that he was employed by Turner Enterprises, and that if he valued his paycheck, he would step aside and let the owner of the company pass. The authority in his voice was absolute. Bruno hesitated, looked at Dante for help, and then stepped back. He knew a boss when he saw one. Dante saw his security line fail and panic began to set in. He forced a smile to the investors surrounding him, muttering an apology about a family matter, and rushed to intercept his father. He met Ike near the foot of the stage. Dante hissed through his teeth, demanding to know what this charade was about and ordering his father to go home before he made a scene. He threatened to have the police drag him out if he didn't leave voluntarily. Ike looked at his son with an expression that was almost pitying. He adjusted his cufflinks and spoke in a voice that was perfectly audible to the people standing nearby. He said he wouldn't dream of leaving yet because the party was just getting started. He said he had come to see the great success his children had built. Tiffany joined them, clutching her clutch bag so hard her knuckles were white. She put on a fake smile for the onlookers, but her voice was pure venom. She whispered that he was senile and that he was ruining everything. She told him to get out and go back to his sad little life because nobody wanted him there. Ike ignored her completely. He walked past them and climbed the stairs to the stage. The microphone stand was waiting. The room was now completely silent. 300 of the city's wealthiest investors, bankers, and socialites were watching. Dante and Tiffany stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, paralyzed by a mixture of fear and confusion. They couldn't physically drag him off stage without causing the exact scene they wanted to avoid. They had to wait it out. They hoped he would just mumble some drunken toast and leave. Ike tapped the microphone. The sound echoed through the ballroom, a sharp thud that commanded attention. He looked out at the crowd. He made eye contact with the key players in the room. He smiled a warm, grandfatherly smile that hid the blade he was about to swing. "Good evening, everyone," Ike began. His voice was rich and steady. It held the room captive. "I apologize for the interruption. My children Dante and Tiffany have put on quite a show tonight, haven't they? The champagne, the music, the beautiful brochures, it is truly impressive." Dante relaxed slightly. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Maybe the old man was just going to congratulate them. Maybe he had accepted defeat and wanted to share in the glory. Dante straightened his tie and nodded to the investors, playing the part of the magnanimous son. Ike continued, "I remember when I bought the land this tower stands on. It was 40 years ago. Nobody believed in this neighborhood then. I poured my sweat, my blood, and my soul into that concrete. I built it so that my family would always have a foundation, a legacy. And tonight I see so many of you here ready to invest your hard-earned money into that legacy, ready to buy apartments in the Turner Tower." Tiffany smiled nervously. This was good. This was a sales pitch. The old man was actually helping them. But then the tone of Ike's voice changed. It didn't become angry. It became surgical. It became the voice of a judge delivering a verdict. "However," Ike said, and the word hung in the air like a guillotine blade, "there is a small detail that my ambitious children seem to have forgotten to mention in their glossy brochures and legal contracts. A detail that I feel legally and morally obligated to share with you, my friends and partners." Dante's stomach dropped. He took a step toward the stage, but it was too late. Ike pulled a folded document from the inside pocket of his tuxedo. He held it up. The Turner Tower. "The building you are all writing checks for tonight is not owned by Dante Turner. It is not owned by Tiffany Turner. And it is certainly not owned by the shell company they created to collect your deposits." A murmur went through the crowd. People started looking at each other. Checkbooks were lowered. Ike continued, his voice rising in power. "As of 6 months ago, the entire property was transferred into the Turner Family Irrevocable Trust, and I, Isaiah Ike Turner, am the sole beneficiary and trustee with absolute power of attorney." He paused to let that sink in. He looked directly at the group of foreign investors who had been circling Dante all night. "This means that any contract you sign with my son tonight is worth less than the napkin you are holding your drink with. He has no right to sell. He has no right to lease. He has no right to renovate. The project you are investing in is a fiction. It is a fraud. And the deposits you have given him, well, unless you get them back in the next 5 minutes, I fear they will be used to pay off gambling debts rather than to build luxury apartments." Chaos erupted. It wasn't a riot, but it was the social equivalent of a nuclear explosion. The silence shattered into 1,000 angry conversations. The investors who had already handed over checks began to surge toward Dante. The polite veneer of society vanished, replaced by the panic of rich people fearing they had been swindled. Dante stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked at the angry faces closing in on him. He looked at Tiffany, who was already backing away, trying to disappear into the crowd. Ike wasn't finished. He leaned into the microphone for one final strike. He didn't look at the crowd anymore. He looked down at his son. "I suggest you do not spend the money you collected tonight, Dante, because the police have already been notified about the attempted mortgage fraud on the building. I imagine they will be very interested to hear about this pre-sale scheme as well." Ike stepped back from the microphone. He didn't stay to watch the carnage. He didn't stay to gloat. He placed the microphone back on the stand with a gentle click. He turned and walked off the stage, descending the stairs on the opposite side, away from where his children were being swallowed by the mob of angry investors. As he walked toward the exit, the sea of people parted for him again, but this time with a different kind of respect. It was fear and awe. They realized they had just witnessed an execution, a public, bloodless, corporate execution. Ike walked past the stunned security guard, tipped his imaginary hat, and pushed open the heavy doors. Outside, the night air was cool and crisp. He took a deep breath. He could hear the shouting and the commotion from inside the ballroom, but it sounded far away like a storm that had already passed. He checked his watch. It was 9 o'clock. He had a meeting with the directors of the children's charity in the morning to discuss the transfer of the assets. He needed to get a good night's sleep. As for his children, their long night was just beginning. The silence in the Plaza Hotel ballroom was absolute. It was not the peaceful silence of a library, but the terrifying silence of a held breath before a scream. Isaiah Ike Turner stood on the stage like an Old Testament prophet. He did not need to shout. The microphone carried his steady, calm voice to every corner of the room, piercing through the layers of expensive perfume and arrogance that had filled the air just moments before. He raised his hand not to wave, but to signal the technician in the booth at the back of the room. Lights. The massive projection screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a loop of the glamorous computer-generated renderings of the future Turner lofts, flickered and went black. A low hum vibrated through the speakers. Then a stark, high-resolution image appeared. It was not a rendering, it was a legal document. Ike turned, slightly gesturing to the screen with his cane. Ladies and gentlemen, what you are seeing now is the deed of trust for the building we are standing in. If you look at the highlighted section dated 6 months ago, you will see that the title is held irrevocably by the Turner Family Trust. And below that, in the section regarding the sale or modification of assets, there is a clause. Ike paused, letting the investors read the words that were zoomed in on the screen. It says that this property cannot be sold, mortgaged, or structurally altered without the unanimous consent of the Board of Trustees, and currently the board consists of one person. Me. Dante felt his knees buckle. He grabbed the edge of a banquet table to support himself. The champagne glass in his hand shattered, cutting his palm, but he didn't feel the pain. He only felt the cold, suffocating grip of panic. He looked at the investors. Their faces had changed from confusion to realization and then to anger. They were looking at their checkbooks, then at Dante, then back at the screen. Tiffany tried to salvage the situation. She rushed toward the stage, her silver dress shimmering, her face twisted in a desperate smile. She grabbed a handheld microphone from a stunned waiter. "Please, everyone," she shrilled, her voice cracking. "My father is confused. These are old documents. We have power of attorney. This is just a senile episode. We will clear this up in the morning. Please enjoy the dessert." Ike didn't even look at her. He simply spoke over her, his voice deeper and more resonant. "There is no confusion, Tiffany, and there is no power of attorney. But fraud is a civil matter. What I am about to show you next moves us into a different territory entirely." Ike nodded to the booth again. The image on the screen changed. This time, it was a video file. The quality was grainy, shot in black and white night vision. It was security footage. The timestamp in the corner read 2:14 a.m. 3 weeks prior. The location was clearly recognizable to anyone who worked in the building. It was the service alley behind the Turner Tower, right next to the main gas intake valves. Dante stopped breathing. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He knew that footage. He thought it had been erased. He thought he had paid the security guard to wipe the server. On the screen, 2 figures appeared. They were wearing dark hoodies, but the camera angle was high and sharp. One of the figures pulled down his hood to wipe sweat from his forehead. The face was unmistakable. It was Dante Turner. Beside him was Jamal, the building's corrupt maintenance chief. The room watched in horrified fascination as the on-screen Dante handed a large pipe wrench to Jamal. They watched as Jamal worked on the valve, not tightening it, but loosening it. They watched as Dante checked his watch, looked around nervously, and then gave a thumbs up. Ike's voice cut through the darkness. "This footage was recovered from the cloud backup of my former assistant, Ruby. You fired her, Dante, because you thought she was just an old woman who didn't understand technology. You didn't know that she backed up the security logs every night automatically. You thought you were causing a minor leak, a maintenance emergency that would force the existing tenants to evacuate so you could start your renovations early." The video continued. A sudden burst of steam or gas erupted from the valve. The 2 figures on the screen scrambled back, laughing as they ran toward the exit. Ike turned back to the crowd. That leak caused an explosion in the basement 2 hours later. 3 firefighters were injured. The structural integrity of the foundation was compromised. You told the insurance company it was an accident due to old pipes. You claimed $3 million in damages. Ike paused, looking directly at his son. "That is not just insurance fraud, Dante. That is arson. That is reckless endangerment. That is a felony." The reaction in the ballroom was instantaneous and violent. It was chaos. The veneer of civilization cracked. A wealthy banker near the front threw his glass on the floor. "You criminal," he shouted at Dante. "I gave you a deposit check for $500,000 this morning," Tiffany screamed. She dropped the microphone and covered her ears as the accusations began to fly from every direction. She looked at Dante with pure hatred. "You said you took care of it!" She shrieked, her voice piercing the din. "You said there were no cameras in the alley." Dante couldn't move. He was paralyzed. He watched the investors pulling out their phones. Some were calling their lawyers to stop payments. Others were calling the police. He saw the flash of cameras. He was ruined. His reputation was incinerated. Prison was inevitable. But then Dante saw something that made the prospect of prison seem like a vacation. In the back of the room, near the shadows of the exit, sat a table of 4 men. They were not shouting. They were not on their phones. They were perfectly still. They were dressed in dark, expensive suits that didn't quite fit the style of the other guests. In the center of them sat Mr. Russo. Russo was the representative of the Viper Syndicate. He was the man who had approved the $3 million loan based on the collateral of the building. Dante locked eyes with Russo. Russo didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. He looked at the screen, which proved the building was never Dante's to give. Then he looked at the video, which proved Dante had damaged the very asset he had pledged. Russo slowly picked up a linen napkin, dabbed the corner of his mouth, and placed it on the table. He stood up. His 3 associates stood up with him. They didn't move toward Dante. They didn't make a scene. They simply turned and walked out of the ballroom, moving with the lethal grace of predators who had decided that the hunt was over and it was time for the slaughter. Dante knew what that exit meant. They weren't leaving to go home. They were leaving to wait outside. They were leaving to prepare. The police would arrest him, yes, but if he made bail, if he walked out of that precinct, the Vipers would be waiting. For the first time in his life, Dante Turner wanted the police to come. He wanted handcuffs, he wanted a cell, he wanted steel bars between him and the mistake he had made. On stage, Ike watched the color drain from his son's face. He saw the direction of Dante's gaze. He knew exactly who was sitting at that back table. He had done his research. He knew about the loan. He knew about the Vipers. Ike felt a pang of sorrow deep in his chest. It was the grief of a father watching his child step off a cliff after ignoring a lifetime of warnings. But he did not look away. He did not step in to save him. The time for saving was over. This was the time for consequences. Ike leaned into the microphone one last time. "The party is over," he said softly. He placed the microphone down. He signaled to the projectionist to cut the feed. The screen went dark, plunging the room into a gloom that matched the mood. Ike walked down the stairs. The investors parted for him, looking at him with a mixture of fear and awe. He was the only thing standing in that room that felt real. He walked past Tiffany, who was now sobbing on the floor, her dress ruined, her makeup streaked. He walked past Dante, who was staring blankly at the door where the Vipers had exited, shivering as if he were freezing to death. Ike didn't stop. He walked straight to the main doors of the ballroom. He pushed them open and stepped out into the lobby. The air in the lobby was cool and quiet. The chaos of the ballroom was muffled behind the heavy doors. Ike took a deep breath. He felt lighter. The burden of the secret, the burden of the deception was gone. He had burned the corruption out of his family. It had been painful, it had been brutal, but it was clean. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his old flip phone. He dialed a number. "Hello, Ruby." Ike said, his voice warm. "Yes, Mr. Turner," the voice on the other end answered. "It's done," Ike said. "You can send the files to the district attorney now." There was a pause on the line. "Are you sure, Ike?" "Once I send them, there is no going back. They will go to prison." Ike looked back at the closed doors of the ballroom. He thought of the disrespect. He thought of the greed. He thought of the gas explosion that could have killed innocent people. "I'm sure, Ruby," he said. "They made their bed. Now they have to sleep in it." He hung up the phone and walked out of the hotel, stepping into the night. He didn't know what the future held for the Turner name. But he knew one thing. Tonight he would sleep soundly. And tomorrow he would start rebuilding. Not a building of glass and steel, but a foundation of honor that had been neglected for far too long. The heavy brass doors of the Plaza Hotel swung shut with a finality that felt like the closing of a tomb. Dante stumbled out onto the sidewalk, the cold night air hitting his sweat-drenched face like a physical slap. The noise of the ballroom, the angry shouts of the investors, and the shattering of his reputation were muffled behind the thick glass, replaced by the indifferent roar of city traffic. He loosened his tie, gasping for air, his chest heaving as if he had just run a marathon. Beside him, Tiffany was already typing furiously on her phone, her heels clicking aggressively on the pavement as she paced back and forth, muttering curses under her breath. Dante leaned against a stone pillar, trying to steady his shaking legs. He looked left then right, scanning the street for a taxi, for a police car, for anything that could take him away from this nightmare. But the street directly in front of the hotel entrance was strangely empty of cabs. There was only a line of 3 black SUVs parked at the curb, their engines idling with a low, menacing rumble. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like slabs of obsidian. Dante's heart stopped. He knew those cars. He knew the license plate of the lead vehicle. The rear door of the middle SUV opened slowly. Mr. Russo stepped out. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a grandfather on his way to the opera, dressed in a cashmere coat and a silk scarf. But Dante knew better. He knew that Russo was a man who viewed human life as a line item on a balance sheet, and Dante was currently deep in the red. Russo didn't shout. He didn't run. He simply stood by the open door of the car and lit a cigarette, the flame of the lighter illuminating the hard lines of his face for a brief second. He exhaled a plume of smoke into the chilly air and looked at Dante with eyes that were completely void of empathy. Dante Russo said, his voice soft but carrying clearly over the wind. "We were just talking about you. My associates and I were very impressed with the presentation inside. The graphics were excellent. The vision was bold." Dante tried to speak, but his voice was a squeak. "Mr. Russo, I can explain. My father, he's confused. The paperwork it's a misunderstanding." Russo held up a hand, silencing him instantly. "Please, Dante, don't insult me. We saw the documents. We saw the video. You sold us a dream, but you put up a ghost as collateral. You mortgaged a building you didn't own. In my world, we have a word for that. We call it theft." Dante took a step back, but two large men had silently stepped out of the other vehicles, blocking his retreat. He was trapped between the hotel wall and the street. Russo took a slow step forward, crushing his cigarette under his expensive leather shoe. "We don't care about family trust, Dante. We don't care about probate courts or lawyers. We gave you $3 million cash. You spent it. Now, since the building is off the table, we need to discuss alternative payment methods. And since you don't have the money, we are going to have to take it out of your hide. Get in the car." It was at this moment that Tiffany, who had been frantically trying to book an Uber, realized the gravity of the situation. She looked at the menacing men, then at her brother, who was pale and trembling. Survival instinct, sharp and cruel, kicked in. She snapped her phone shut and stepped away from Dante, putting distance between them as if he were contagious. "I have nothing to do with this," she screamed, her voice shrill and piercing. "This is all him. He's the one who signed the papers. He's the one who dealt with you people. I didn't know anything about the loan." Dante looked at his sister in disbelief. "Tiffany, what are you doing? You spent that money too. You bought the jewelry. You paid for the trip to Monaco." Tiffany spun on him, her face twisted into a mask of hatred. "Shut up, you liar. You told me it was profit from the crypto investments. I am a victim here." She turned to Russo, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Listen to me. I am filing for divorce immediately. Not from him, obviously, he is my brother, but I am severing all business ties. I am dissolving our partnership right now. I am not liable for his debts. Take him. Do whatever you want with him. Just let me go." She began to scramble away, her high heels slipping on the concrete, desperate to flee before the net closed around her too. She was willing to feed her own brother to the wolves to save her designer dress from getting splattered. "Going somewhere. Tiffany." The voice came from the shadows of the hotel entrance. Isaiah Ike Turner stepped out into the light. He had been watching. He had seen the Vipers arrive. He had seen his son's terror, and he had heard his daughter's betrayal. Ike walked down the stairs, his cane tapping rhythmically on the stone. He stopped a few feet away from the group. He didn't look at the mobsters. He looked straight at his daughter. "Dad," Tiffany cried out, seeing a lifeline. Tell them, I had nothing to do with the loan I'm leaving. I'm done with Dante. I want my share of the family assets, and I want out. I am going to sue for a partition of the estate. I want what is mine." Ike let out a dry, hollow laugh. It was the sound of a judge who had heard enough lies for one lifetime. "You want to split the assets?" Tiffany, Ike asked, his voice calm but cutting. "You want to dissolve the partnership with your brother and take your half?" "Yes," Tiffany shouted. "I want my half. I earned it. I put up with him for years. I want to liquidate everything we own together and take my 50%. Ike nodded slowly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a check. It was a copy of the forensic accounting report he had commissioned weeks ago. "That is fair," Ike said. "In a dissolution of partnership, you are indeed entitled to 50% of the assets. But you are also responsible for 50% of the liabilities." He walked over to Tiffany and shoved the paper into her hand. "I have reviewed the books of your joint company, Dante and Tiffany Enterprises," Ike continued. "You have no assets. The office furniture is leased. The cars are leased. The company accounts are overdrawn by $40,000. The only significant thing on your balance sheet is a joint liability." Ike pointed a finger at Russo, who was watching the family drama with a look of amusement. "The only thing you two own together is that $3 million debt to Mr. Russo." Ike said, his voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a death knell. "You were partners, Tiffany. You signed the incorporation papers as a 50-50 owner. You accepted the wire transfers into the joint account. You spent the money. Legally, and more importantly, in the eyes of these gentlemen, you owe them $1.5 million. Tiffany stared at the paper, her mouth agape. She shook her head violently. No, that's not fair. I didn't sign the loan. Ike looked at her with eyes that were cold and hard. You spent the money, Tiffany. Ignorance is not a defense when your wrist is covered in diamonds bought with stolen cash. You wanted to split the baby. Congratulations, you get the legs. He turned to Russo. Gentlemen, my daughter has just kindly offered to assume half of the debt. I believe that makes her a party to your negotiations. Russo smiled. It was a terrifying smile. He tipped his head toward Tiffany. The two men who were blocking Dante split up. One stayed with the brother, the other moved smoothly to block the sister. Ike took a step back. He looked at his two children. Dante was weeping silently, his arrogance completely washed away by fear. Tiffany was shrieking about lawyers, about fairness, about how she was a good person. Ike felt a terrible weight in his chest, the weight of failure. Not his failure, but theirs. He had tried to teach them. He had tried to warn them. But some lessons could only be learned in the dark. I am going home, Ike said. His voice was tired. I suggest you both work out a payment plan. I don't think Mr. Russo accepts IOUs. Dad. Dante screamed. Dad, don't leave us. They're going to kill us. Ike didn't turn around. He walked toward the street corner where a yellow taxi had just pulled up. He opened the door and climbed in. As the taxi pulled away, he didn't look back through the rear window. He didn't want to see his children being ushered into the black SUVs. He didn't want to see the reality of the hell they had built for themselves. He sat back in the seat and closed his eyes. The city lights blurred past him. He had protected the trust. He had protected the legacy. He had protected the charity. But he couldn't protect them from themselves anymore. The cord was cut. The nest was empty. And the birds that had refused to learn how to fly were now on the ground facing the cats. The taxi driver looked in the rearview mirror. Rough night, pal. Ike opened his eyes and looked at the passing city. You have no idea, he whispered. Just drive. Back on the sidewalk, the heavy doors of the SUVs slammed shut, swallowing the screams of the Turner heirs. The convoy pulled away, slowly disappearing into the flow of traffic, just another anonymous tragedy in a city of millions. The pavement where they had stood was empty, save for a broken champagne glass and a crumpled brochure for a luxury life that never existed. The dawn did not break with the promise of a new day, but with the screaming of sirens that tore through the silence of the Upper East Side. It was the sound of reality finally catching up with a lifetime of evasion. Dante was not found in a boardroom or a luxury restaurant. He was found huddled in the corner of his penthouse bedroom, a half-packed suitcase open on the bed, his passport clutched in a trembling hand. He had been trying to run. He had been trying to find a country that wouldn't ask questions about where his money came from or why the Viper Syndicate was looking for him. But the law was faster. The arrest was not cinematic. There was no slow-motion walk. There was just the harsh, efficient brutality of the police department executing a warrant. They didn't ask him nicely to come with them. They kicked open the door. They threw him against the silk wallpaper of his hallway. They read him his rights, but Dante couldn't hear the words over the roaring of his own blood in his ears. He was charged with insurance fraud, arson, and conspiracy. But then the detective added the charge that turned Dante's blood to ice. Involuntary manslaughter. The investigation into the gas leak and the subsequent explosion had taken a dark turn. The police had analyzed the security logs and the cloud data provided by Ike. They discovered that on the night Dante and Jamal tampered with the valves to stage the accident, they had also manually disabled the safety sensors in the basement archives to prevent the alarms from triggering too early. They wanted the damage to be significant enough to claim the insurance. What they didn't know, or perhaps what they didn't care to check, was that Ruby, the 70-year-old archivist who had served the company for 3 decades, was working late in the records room. When the gas filled the basement, the sensors didn't go off. Ruby didn't smell it until it was too late. She had collapsed from asphyxiation before the explosion even happened. Her death had been ruled a heart attack, initially a tragic coincidence, but the new evidence proved it was a direct result of the sabotage. Dante hadn't just broken a pipe, he had taken a life. He had killed the woman who used to give him candy when he visited the office as a child. The news cycle was ruthless. The golden boy of real estate was plastered on every screen, looking disheveled and terrified in handcuffs. The narrative shifted instantly. He was no longer a savvy businessman. He was a monster who sacrificed a loyal employee for an insurance payout. 3 days later, Ike walked into the visitation room of the Metropolitan Detention Center. The air inside smelled of industrial bleach and stale sweat. It was a place designed to strip a man of his dignity, to remind him that he was nothing but a number in a cage. Ike wore his best suit, a charcoal gray wool that he used to wear to board meetings. He wasn't there to negotiate business. He was there to say goodbye. He sat on the metal stool on one side of the thick, scratched plexiglass. On the other side, the door buzzed open, and a guard escorted Dante in. The transformation was shocking. In just 72 hours, Dante had aged 10 years. His hair was greasy and unkempt. His eyes were red-rimmed and sunken, darting around the room with the paranoia of a hunted animal. He wore an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame, a stark contrast to the tailored Italian suits he used to wear like armor. When he saw his father, he didn't look angry. He looked like a child who had woken up from a nightmare and needed his parents to turn on the light. Dante threw himself at the glass, his hands slapping against the barrier. "Dad," he choked out, his voice cracking. "Oh God, Dad, you came. You have to get me out of here. It's a mistake. It's all a mistake." Jamal lied. "I didn't know Ruby was down there. I swear I didn't know." Ike sat perfectly still. He placed his hands on the counter, his fingers interlaced. He looked at his son with a deep, aching sadness. It was the look of a gardener who realizes the tree he planted has rotted from the inside and cannot be saved. Dante continued to babble, tears streaming down his face. "The bail hearing is tomorrow. The judge set it at $5 million because I'm a flight risk. You have the money in the trust. I know you do. You have to post bail. Please, Dad, I can't survive in here. The other inmates, they know who I am. They know I have money. I won't last a week." Ike remained silent, letting the desperation pour out of his son. He listened to the excuses, the begging, the bargaining. He waited until Dante ran out of breath, until the silence between them was heavy enough to hold the truth. "Dante," Ike said softly. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the noise of the jail like a razor. "I am not going to post your bail." Dante froze. His mouth fell open. "What? But you're my father. You can't leave me in here. This is prison, Dad. This isn't a timeout." Ike leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Dante's. "I am your father, and that is exactly why I am leaving you in here." Ike took a breath, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. He had to be strong. He had to be the rock that shattered the illusion. "Do you remember your mother?" Ike asked. Dante blinked, confused by the sudden change in topic. "Mom? What does Mom have to do with this?" "She died of a stroke." Ike shook his head slowly. "That is what we put on the death certificate. That is what we told the neighbors. But that is not the truth. Your mother didn't die of a stroke. She died of a broken heart and a spirit crushed by worry. She died because 10 years ago, when you stole from the company for the first time, when you gambled away her retirement fund, she refused to let me report you. She made me cover it up. She worked double shifts. She sold her jewelry. She lost sleep every single night, terrified that her son would end up exactly where you are sitting right now." Dante stared at him, stunned. He had never heard this. "The stress ate her alive." Ike continued, his voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "She shielded you. I shielded you. We thought we were protecting you. We thought if we just gave you one more chance, one more bailout, one more safety net, you would change. But we were wrong. We weren't protecting you. We were crippling you. We were teaching you that actions don't have consequences. We were teaching you that other people exist to pay for your mistakes." Ike stood up. The metal chair scraped loudly against the concrete floor. "Your mother died because of your greed, Dante. And my silence, my enabling, helped you kill her just as surely as you killed Ruby." Dante sobbed, his head falling into his hands. "No, that's not true. Stop it. It is the only truth that matters now," Ike said. "I have spent the last week praying. I asked God what a father is supposed to do when his son becomes a monster, and the answer was clear. A father doesn't save his son from the fire if the fire is the only thing that can purify him." Ike placed his hand on the glass directly over where Dante's hand was resting. "I could sign a check right now," Ike whispered. "I could pull $3 million from the trust and have you walking out of that door in an hour. But if I do that, I am not saving you. I am condemning you. If you walk out that door, you will never learn. You will never change. You will run, or you will lie, or you will find another way to hurt someone else." Ike looked deep into Dante's eyes. I can save you from this jail cell, son, but I cannot save you from yourself. You are your own worst enemy. You are the danger. And this concrete room, this metal cot, this fear you are feeling right now, this is the only thing that might save your soul. Dante looked up, panic rising again. But the vipers, if I stay in here, I'm safe from them. Ike nodded grimly. In here, you are just a number. In here, the vipers can't touch you. Paradoxically, Dante Prison is the safest place on earth for you right now. It is the only place where you cannot gamble, where you cannot sign contracts, and where you cannot hurt anyone but yourself. The guard stepped forward. Time's up. Ike buttoned his jacket. He looked at his son one last time. He didn't see the arrogance anymore. He saw a broken man who finally had to face the mirror. This punishment is not revenge, Dante. Ike said, his voice breaking. This punishment is the last gift your mother and I can give you. It is the gift of accountability. It is the lesson we should have taught you 20 years ago. Learn it well, son, because when you get out, whether it is in 5 years or 10, you will be starting from zero. And that is the only place where a man can truly build something real. Ike turned and walked toward the heavy steel door. Dad, Dante screamed, his voice muffled by the glass. Dad, I'm sorry. Dad, please. Ike paused for a heartbeat. He closed his eyes, letting a single tear roll down his cheek. He whispered a silent goodbye to the little boy. Dante used to be the boy who used to hold his hand crossing the street. Then he opened his eyes, pushed the door open, and walked out of the prison, leaving his son behind to find his own way out of the darkness he had created. The heavy clank of the electronic lock engaging behind him sounded like the final period at the end of a long, tragic sentence. Justice had been served, but it tasted nothing like victory. It tasted only of ashes and regret. The morning sun hit the manicured lawns of the gated community in Greenwich, but it brought no warmth to the woman pacing inside the sprawling colonial mansion. Tiffany Turner was a trapped animal in a cage of gold and marble. Her phone was in her hand, her thumb hovering over contacts she had been too proud to call just a week ago. But pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Dante was in jail. The Viper Syndicate was waiting for their money, and Tiffany, who had spent her entire adult life believing she was the smartest person in the room, was now realizing she was just the one with the most to lose. She was tearing through the drawers of her husband's mahogany desk in the home office. She wasn't looking for cash. She was looking for the deed. The plan was simple and desperate. She would sell the house. It was worth $4 million. She would take a quick cash offer, pay off her half of the debt to the mob, and disappear to Europe with whatever was left. She would leave Dante to rot. She would leave her father to his charity work. She would survive. That was what she always did. She survived. She found the file. Her hands were shaking so badly she tore the edge of the folder. She pulled out the property title. She scanned the document looking for her name. She needed to see Tiffany Turner listed as the owner. She needed that validation. She needed that lifeline. But her name wasn't there. She blinked, thinking her stress-induced migraine was blurring her vision. She read it again. The owner of record was listed as Turner Residential Holdings, LLC. She frowned. That was fine. That was the family shell company. She was a director. She could sign for it. Then she saw the stamp at the bottom of the page. It was a transfer stamp dated 6 months ago. The property had been moved. The ownership had been transferred from Turner Residential Holdings to the Turner Family Irrevocable Trust. Tiffany screamed. It wasn't a word. It was a raw, primal sound of frustration that echoed off the high ceilings. She threw the file across the room. It hit a vase of imported lilies, sending water and glass crashing to the floor. He knew. The old man knew everything. He hadn't just secured the office building. He had secured everything. Every roof she had ever slept under, every car she had ever driven, every piece of stability she thought she owned was actually borrowed. She wasn't a homeowner. She was a squatter in her father's empire. Before she could process the full extent of the disaster, a heavy pounding on the front door shook the house. Tiffany froze. Her first thought was the Vipers. Had they come to collect already? She looked at the security monitor. It wasn't the black SUVs. It was a white van and a police cruiser. She ran to the door, flinging it open. A sheriff's deputy stood there holding a clipboard. Behind him were 4 men in blue coveralls looking bored and efficient. "Mrs. Tiffany Turner?" the deputy asked, touching the brim of his hat. "Yes," she snapped. "What is this? I didn't call the police. We are here to execute an order of eviction," the deputy said, handing her a thick packet of papers. "You have been served with a notice to vacate the premises immediately. The owner of the property has requested possession." Tiffany laughed. It was a hysterical, high-pitched sound. "Eviction. You must be joking. This is my house. I have lived here for 8 years. You can't evict me. I have rights." The deputy didn't blink. "According to the title search and the court order obtained this morning, you are a tenant at will with no lease agreement. The owner, the Turner Family Trust, has terminated your residency effective immediately due to unauthorized use of the property as collateral for illegal activities." Tiffany felt the blood drain from her face. She tried to slam the door, but the deputy put a heavy boot in the frame. "Ma'am, please don't make this difficult," he said. "These gentlemen are here to remove your personal effects to the curb. You have 10 minutes to gather your essentials before they start clearing the rooms." "No," Tiffany shrieked. "Get away from my house. I will sue you. I will sue the department." She turned and ran back into the foyer as if hiding in the kitchen would make them go away. But the movers were already marching in their boots, muddying the pristine white carpet. They started picking up the expensive vases, the paintings, the chairs. They moved with a terrifying speed, dismantling her life piece by piece. Tiffany stood in the middle of her living room watching her world dissolve. This was exactly what she had planned to do to her father. She remembered the conversation with Dante a year ago. She remembered laughing as they planned to move Ike into the basement or a cheap nursing home so they could sell his estate. She remembered saying that old people don't need so much space. Now the universe was holding up a mirror and the reflection was hideous. She ran out the front door, desperate to find someone to blame, someone to scream at. And there he was. Isaiah Ike Turner was standing on the sidewalk near the mailbox. He was wearing his old trench coat and leaning on his cane. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't gloating. He was watching the movers carry out a velvet sofa with the same expression one might use to watch a controlled demolition. "You!" Tiffany screamed, sprinting down the driveway in her bare feet. "You did this, you evil, vindictive old man!" She stopped a few feet from him, her chest heaving. Her hair was wild, her makeup smeared. She looked nothing like the socialite who had sneered at him at the party. She looked broken. "How could you?" she sobbed. "This is my home, Dad. This is where I live. You are throwing me on the street like a dog." Ike looked at her calmly. "You are not a dog, Tiffany. A dog is loyal. A dog loves the hand that feeds it. You are something else entirely. And this is not your home. It never was. It was a privilege I extended to you, a privilege you abused when you tried to sell it to pay off a gambling debt. I didn't try to sell it." Tiffany lied, desperate. Ike held up a hand. "Don't lie to me. Not anymore. I spoke to the real estate agent you called this morning. I know everything." Tiffany fell to her knees on the pavement. The neighbors were coming out of their houses now. They were watching. The shame was burning her skin like acid. She looked around, seeing the faces of the people she used to look down on. She saw their judgment. She needed a weapon. She needed a shield. Then she thought of him. Her son, Leo. She looked up at Ike, tears streaming down her face, her voice taking on a new manipulative edge. "You are a monster," she hissed. "You don't care about me, fine. But what about Leo? He is your grandson. He is innocent. Are you going to throw a 7-year-old boy onto the street? Are you going to let your own flesh and blood starve?" She stood up, pointing a finger at Ike's chest. "You are cruel. You are heartless. You are the grandfather of my child. How can you sleep at night knowing you made your grandson homeless?" The movers paused. The neighbors whispered. It was a powerful accusation. It was the ultimate guilt trip. Ike didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He stepped closer to his daughter, his eyes hard as flint. "I have already spoken to the headmaster of Leo's boarding school," Ike said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "The trust has paid his tuition in full for the next 12 years. His room and board are covered. His clothing allowance is established. He will not spend a single night on the street." Tiffany stared at him, her mouth opening and closing. Ike continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "I love that boy. And that is exactly why I am removing him from your influence. He will be safe at school. He will be safe from the chaos you bring from the criminals you associate with and from the toxic values you try to teach him." Ike leaned in his face inches from hers. "My grandchild is taken care of, Tiffany. He has a future. But you are not a child. You are a 40-year-old woman who has never worked a real day in her life. You are on your own. Tiffany grabbed his arm. But I have no money. The accounts are frozen. Where will I go? What will I eat? Ike gently removed her hand from his arm as if brushing off a piece of lint. There is a hiring sign at the diner down on 4th Street, Ike said. They are looking for waitresses. Minimum wage is $15 an hour. It is honest work. It is hard work. It is the kind of work your mother did to put food on the table when we were starting out. He turned to walk away. Dad, Tiffany screamed, falling back to the ground. You can't leave me like this. I'm your daughter. Ike paused. He looked back over his shoulder. The movers were bringing out her collection of designer handbags. I am not leaving you, Tiffany, Ike said softly. I am finally letting you go. I am letting you experience the one thing you have avoided your entire life. Reality. He walked to his car, got in, and drove away. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. He knew what he would see. He would see a woman sitting on a pile of expensive possessions that meant nothing, finally understanding that the only thing she truly owned was her own choices. Tiffany sat on the cold pavement as the first drops of rain began to fall. The deputy walked over and handed her the eviction notice. Ma'am, he said gently, you need to move off the driveway. The truck needs to back up. Tiffany looked at the paper. Then she looked at the empty street where her father's car had disappeared. She realized then that the bank of Dad was closed. The emotional manipulation account was overdrawn. She was alone. And for the first time in her life, she was terrified not of losing her money, but of having to find herself. She stood up, her expensive dress soaked with rain and mud. She wiped her face. She looked at the hiring sign the deputy had mentioned in her mind's eye. $15 an hour. It wasn't enough to buy a Gucci bag, but maybe, just maybe, it was enough to buy back a shred of dignity. She turned and began to walk, leaving the mansion behind, stepping out of the fantasy and into the cold, hard, necessary rain. The crane lowered the massive brass letters TURNE and R from the facade of the 40-story building, placing them gently onto the flatbed truck waiting below. From his office window on the top floor, Isaiah Ike Turner watched the process with a sense of profound relief. For decades, that name on the skyline had been a source of pride, a symbol of the empire he had built from nothing. But in recent years, under the shadow of his children's greed and the stain of his own blindness, those letters had started to feel heavy, like chains rather than laurels. Now watching them come down was not an act of surrender. It was an act of liberation. The sale of the Turner Tower was the fastest real estate transaction in the city's history. The buyers, a conglomerate of clean energy investors, had been circling the property for months, but Dante had always chased them away, convinced he could extract a higher price or turn the building into his personal playground. Ike didn't play games. He called the CEO, directly named a fair price, and set one non-negotiable condition. The deal had to be cash, and it had to close in 48 hours. The lawyers scrambled, the accountants panicked, but the ink was now dry. The wire transfer had hit the trust's account that morning. The building that had almost destroyed his family was gone, and in its place was a war chest of resources ready to do some actual good. Ike turned away from the window and looked at the man sitting uncomfortable on the edge of the leather sofa. Mateo looked out of place in the pristine office. He was wearing his mechanic's jumpsuit, his hands scrubbed clean but still bearing the permanent shadows of engine grease under the fingernails. He was twisting his baseball cap in his hands, looking at the floor. Mr. Turner, Mateo said, his voice nervous. Look, if this is about the company car, I swear I fixed the transmission just like you asked. I didn't mean to overcharge for the parts. Ike smiled, a genuine warmth reaching his eyes for the first time in weeks. He walked over to the minibar, poured 2 glasses of sparkling water, and handed one to the young mechanic. Mateo, Ike said gently, sitting in the armchair opposite him. You are not here because of a transmission, and you certainly didn't overcharge me. In fact, looking back at the invoices, you have been undercharging me for labor for 5 years. Mateo shrugged, embarrassed. You were good to me, Mr. Turner. You gave me business when my shop was about to go under. I don't forget things like that. Ike nodded slowly. And I don't forget when a man risks his own safety to tell a hard truth. When you came to me that night, when you showed me the cut brake lines on my sedan and told me it wasn't wear and tear, you saved my life. You knew that telling me would put you in the crosshairs of dangerous people. You knew my son would come after you if he found out. But you spoke up anyway. Mateo looked down at his boots. It was just the right thing to do, sir. I couldn't let you get in that car. Ike reached for a thick envelope on the coffee table and slid it across to Mateo. "Integrity is a rare currency these days," Mateo, Ike said. "My own flesh and blood didn't have it. My executives didn't have it. But you, a man who struggles to pay rent on a garage in the Bronx, you had it in spades." Mateo hesitated, then opened the envelope. He pulled out a stack of legal documents. He read the cover page and his eyes went wide. He looked up at Ike, his mouth opening and closing in shock. This says 10%, Mateo stammered. 10% of what? 10% of the new venture, Ike explained, leaning back. "With the proceeds from the sale of this building, the trust is launching a new organization today. It will be called the Ruby Turner Center. It is a foundation dedicated to providing legal aid, safe housing, and financial recovery services for elderly victims of financial abuse and domestic coercion. We are going to help people who are being bullied by their own families, just like I was." Ike pointed to the papers in Mateo's hand. "We are buying that old warehouse district down by the docks. We are going to renovate it into a sanctuary. Housing units, legal offices, a community garden. It is a massive construction project. I am too old to run a construction site, and I don't trust anyone in suits anymore. I need a project manager I can trust with my life." Mateo shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. "Mr. Turner, I fix cars. I don't know anything about running a foundation. And 10%, that's millions of dollars. I can't accept this." Ike leaned forward, his voice firm. "You fix broken things, Mateo. That is exactly what we are going to do. We are going to fix broken lives. And as for the money, it is not a gift. It is an investment. I am investing in your character. I need a partner who understands that money is a tool, not a god. You are the only man I know who fits that description." Mateo wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He looked at the contract, then at Ike. He didn't say thank you. The words seemed too small. He simply nodded a solemn promise, passing between two men who understood the weight of loyalty. "I won't let you down, Mr. Turner," Mateo whispered. "I know you won't," Ike replied. "Now take those papers to your wife. Tell her you're going to be home late tonight because we have a lot of planning to do." After Mateo left, the office fell silent again. The sun was beginning to set, casting long golden shadows across the empty room. The shelves were bare. The personal artifacts had been packed into boxes. The only thing remaining on the desk was a small framed photograph. Ike walked over to the desk and sat down in his chair for the last time. He picked up the photograph. It was a picture of Ruby taken at the company Christmas party 5 years ago. She was laughing, holding a glass of punch. Her eyes crinkled with joy. She looked vibrant, alive, and full of the quiet wisdom that had kept the company running for 30 years. Ike ran his thumb over the glass frame. He felt a lump in his throat, but it wasn't the sharp pain of grief anymore. It was a dull, aching longing. "Well, old girl," Ike said softly to the photo, "we did it. The building is sold. The vipers are gone. The rats are in their cages." He paused, listening to the hum of the air conditioning, imagining her voice scolding him for working too late. "You were always the smart one, Ruby," he continued, a small smile playing on his lips, backing up the security footage to the cloud. "That was brilliant. You knew, didn't you? You knew before I did that Dante was rotten. You tried to tell me in your own way with those raised eyebrows and those little comments about checking the accounts. I was too stubborn to listen. I was too proud to believe my son was a thief." Ike sighed, placing the photo back on the desk. "I'm sorry it cost you everything, Ruby. I am so sorry. I would give every penny of this sale to have you walk through that door one more time with my coffee, but I can't do that. So I did the next best thing." He looked around the room, visualizing the future. "The center will bear your name, Ruby. Every person we save, every old man we pull out of a basement, every grandmother we protect from a greedy child, that will be your legacy. They will know the name Ruby Turner. They will know that you were the one who saved me even from beyond the grave." Ike stood up and buttoned his trench coat. He picked up the photo and tucked it carefully into his inside pocket right next to his heart. He grabbed his cane and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the light switch. "You calculated everything perfectly," old friend Ike whispered into the twilight. "But next time if you see trouble coming, don't just leave a breadcrumb trail. Just slap me in the face. It would save us both a lot of time." He flicked the switch. The office plunged into darkness, leaving the ghosts of the past behind. Ike stepped out into the hallway, closing the door on the Turner Tower era. The elevator was waiting. Down in the lobby, the new owners were already measuring for renovations. Outside, the city was moving on. But Isaiah Ike Turner wasn't just moving on. He was moving up. He had a warehouse to buy, a center to build, and a promise to keep. And for the first time in a long time, he walked not with the heavy step of a victim, but with the steady, purposeful stride of a man who had reclaimed his own soul. The seasons have a way of washing away the stains of the past if you let them. It has been exactly 365 days since the sign was removed from the Turner Tower. 1 full year since the police cars flashed their lights outside the Plaza Hotel. To the outside world, the scandal was the story of the decade. The newspapers ran headlines for weeks about the fall of the real estate prince and the corruption of the Golden family. But news cycles are short, and the world moved on. For the people involved, however, the silence that followed the storm was where real life began. I sat on a wooden bench in the courtyard of the newly inaugurated Ruby Turner Center. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and blooming jasmine. This wasn't a skyscraper of glass and steel designed to intimidate. It was a renovated brick warehouse district by the water filled with sunlight, green gardens, and the quiet hum of healing. We had opened the doors 2 months ago. The rooms were already full. Elderly men and women who had been coerced, tricked, or abandoned by their families were finding something here they thought they had lost forever. They were finding dignity. A small hand tugged at my sleeve, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was Leo. My grandson looked different than he did a year ago. The designer clothes that made him look like a miniature adult were gone, replaced by jeans with grass stains on the knees and a simple t-shirt. His eyes, once guarded and anxious, were clear and bright. Grandpa Leo said, pointing at the flower bed we had been working on. "The hydrangeas are thirsty. Can I use the hose?" I smiled and nodded. "Go ahead, Leo. But remember what I taught you. Water the roots, not the leaves. That is where the strength is." I watched him run over to the spigot. He was 8 years old, and for the first time in his life he was learning the value of nurturing something, rather than just owning it. Tiffany had lost custody. It wasn't a vindictive legal battle, it was a necessary intervention. The court saw a woman without a home, without an income, and with a history of using her child as a bargaining chip. They granted temporary guardianship to the trust and by extension to me. Tiffany was allowed supervised visits every other weekend, provided she maintained her job at the diner and stayed clean. She hated it at first. She screamed and cried. But last week when she visited, she was quiet. She looked tired, but she looked real. She brought Leo a comic book bought with her own tips. It was the first honest gift she had ever given him. As for Dante and Jamal, their reality was far less scenic. They were currently housed in the medium security wing of the state correctional facility. I visited Dante once a month. We didn't talk about business, we didn't talk about appeals, we talked about books. I sent him novels, histories, and biographies. He had a job in the prison library. He told me that for the first time in his life he was actually reading the books instead of just putting them on a shelf to look smart. He looked older, his hair thinning, his face lined. The arrogance was gone, scraped away by the harsh routine of cell block life. He was learning that respect wasn't something you could buy with a platinum credit card. It was something you earned by how you treated the man in the bunk next to you. I heard the heavy sound of boots on the gravel path and looked up. Matteo was walking toward me carrying 2 large takeout containers from the local Italian deli. He wasn't wearing his mechanic's jumpsuit today. He was wearing a collared shirt and slacks, looking every bit the director of operations that he now was. But he still walked with the humble rolling gait of a man who knew how to fix an engine. Lunchtime boss Matteo called out grinning, "I got the lasagna. I know it's your cheat day." I laughed, a sound that felt rusty but good in my chest. "You are going to make me fat, Matteo. And stop calling me boss. I'm just the chairman of the board. You run this place." Matteo sat down on the bench beside me, opening the containers. The smell of tomato sauce and garlic filled the air. We sat there, an 80-year-old tycoon and a 30-year-old mechanic eating lunch in the sun, while my grandson chased a butterfly near the fountain. "You know, Mr. Turner," Matteo said between bites, "we got a letter today from that lady in Unit 4, Mrs. Higgins. She said her son tried to visit her yesterday to get her to sign some power of attorney papers." I stiffened slightly. The old protective instinct flared up. "Did he get in?" Matteo shook his head. "No chance." Security stopped him at the gate. "We showed him the protection order. We told him that his mother is busy living her life and she isn't signing anything. He threw a fit, but he left. Mrs. Higgins. She cried when we told her she was safe. She said she slept through the night for the first time in 10 years. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. That is the work, Mateo. That is the legacy. It isn't about the buildings we put up. It's about the walls we build to protect the vulnerable. I looked at Mateo. This young man who had no blood relation to me, who owed me nothing, had become more of a son to me in 1 year than Dante had been in 40. He stayed late every night. He treated the residents with reverence. He checked the brakes on my car every single week just to be sure. I realized then that I had spent so much of my life defining family by biology. I thought family was the people who shared your DNA, the people who sat at your Thanksgiving table by default. But I was wrong. Biology is just an accident of birth. Family is a choice. Family are the people who stand beside you when the money runs out. Family are the people who tell you the truth when you don't want to hear it. Family are the people who help you plant hydrangeas on a Sunday afternoon because they know it brings you peace. Leo ran back to us, his shoes muddy, a giant smile on his face. Grandpa. Look, I found a worm. It's helping the soil. I chuckled and wiped a smudge of dirt from his cheek. That's right, Leo. Even the smallest creature has a job to do. I looked around the garden. I saw the plaque on the wall of the main building, the Ruby Turner Center. I reached into my pocket and touched the small silver locket that held her picture. For a long time I thought I was doing this to punish my children. I thought I was the avenging angel, the angry patriarch teaching a harsh lesson. But as I sat there surrounded by the peace I had fought so hard to create, I realized it wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. I had to break the cycle of greed before it consumed the next generation. I had to stop the rot before it reached Leo. Dante and Tiffany were on their own paths now. Maybe they would find redemption. Maybe they wouldn't. That was no longer my burden to carry. My job was to hold the line. My job was to ensure that the values Ruby and I believed in didn't die with us. I looked directly at you, the person listening to this story. I want you to understand something. The world will tell you that you are weak when you get old. They will tell you that you should step aside, that you should let the young and hungry take over, even if they are hungry for the wrong things. They will try to gaslight you into believing that your standards are outdated and your caution is just senility. Don't believe them. There is a fire that burns in the heart of a man who has loved deeply. It is a fire that does not go out with age. It is the fire of duty. I may walk with a cane now. My hands may shake when I sign my name. But make no mistake, I am stronger now than I was when I was building skyscrapers, because now I am not building for profit. I am building for principle. So if you ever find yourself underestimated, if you ever find yourself surrounded by wolves in sheep's clothing, remember my story. Remember the old man who swapped a 40-story tower for a community garden. Remember the mechanic who became a director. And remember that the most dangerous thing you can do is underestimate a man who is fighting to protect the memory of the woman he loved. I took a deep breath of the cool air, closed my eyes, and felt the sun on my face. The war was over. The garden was growing. And for the first time in a long, long time, everything was exactly as it should be. They say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes greed is thicker than blood. My sons didn't just try to steal my money. They tried to steal my dignity and erase their mother's legacy. I learned the hard way that you cannot save people who are determined to destroy themselves even if you gave them life. True inheritance isn't real estate or bank accounts, it's character. If you raise your children to love things and use people, don't be surprised when they eventually use you. Protect your heart, but protect your legacy even harder. Sometimes no is the most loving word a father can say. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of the true value of family, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience, justice, and the strength of the human spirit. Until next time.